Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The curtains moved, just a slight flutter but enough to catch my eye. I froze mid-sip of my morning coffee, staring at the window across the street. My new neighbor's house. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, but then I saw it again, a shadow shifting behind the thin fabric. He was watching me. Again. I'd moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood just 3 weeks ago, hoping for a fresh start after my divorce. The house was perfect, a charming 2-story with a small garden out front, the kind of place where you'd expect to find friendly neighbors and block parties. And for the most part, it was exactly that. Except for him. I first noticed him 2 days after I'd moved in. I was outside and tending to my new rose bushes when I felt that prickle on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, like someone's eyes are boring into you. I looked up, scanning the street, and that's when I saw him, standing in his upstairs window, partially hidden by the curtain, but unmistakably staring in my direction. I waved, trying to be friendly. He didn't wave back, just kept staring. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just curious about the new neighbor. But as days passed, I realized it wasn't just curiosity. Every time I stepped outside, he was there, watching. When I left for work, when I came home, when I checked the mail, always in that same window, always hidden behind that same curtain. I tried to ignore it, to go about my life as if everything was normal, but it was getting harder to shake off that uneasy feeling, especially when I realized he seemed to know things he shouldn't know. It started with little comments from other neighbors. "Oh, Jim mentioned you work in finance," Mrs. Patterson said one day as we chatted over the fence. I froze. I hadn't told anyone in the neighborhood about my job yet. How did he know? Then there was the day I came home to find a package on my doorstep, a book I'd been wanting to read. The note simply said, "Thought you might enjoy this. Your neighbor." I hadn't mentioned that book to anyone. I'd only looked it up online, in the privacy of my own home. That night, I lay awake, staring at my ceiling, my mind racing. How much did he know? How was he finding these things out? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd mentioned my job in passing and forgot. Maybe the book was just a lucky guess. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I decided to confront him. I marched across the street, my heart pounding but determined to put an end to this. I knocked on his door, waited, knocked again. No answer. His car was in the driveway, but the house remained silent. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. There he was in that damn window again. This time, he didn't try to hide. He stood there in full view, staring down at me. A chill ran down my spine. His eyes were cold, emotionless. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret, my secrets. I opened my mouth to call out to him, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. Something about his gaze paralyzed me. I hurried back to my house, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking. That night, I drew all my curtains, double-checked every lock. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching. Somehow seeing through walls and curtains, I tossed and turned, every creak of the house making me jump. In the morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, I stumbled to the kitchen for coffee. That's when I saw it. A note slipped under my front door. My blood ran cold as I read the words. "I see you like to sleep on your right side. You should really invest in better curtains for your bedroom." My cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed my bare feet, but I barely noticed. How? How could he know that? My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard. There was no way he could see in, no way he could know, unless he'd been inside my house. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. I ran through the house and checking every room, every closet, looking for any sign of intrusion. Nothing seemed out of place, but that didn't calm my nerves. If anything, it made it worse. He was good at this, too good. I called in sick to work that day. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my house, of giving him free rein to what? I didn't even know what he was doing, how he was doing it, but I knew I had to stop it. I spent the day installing new locks, setting up security cameras, even putting bars on my first floor windows. The hardware store clerk gave me odd looks as I piled my cart high with every security device they had, but I didn't care. I needed to feel safe in my own home again. As night fell, I sat in my living room, surrounded by empty boxes and packaging, my new security system humming softly. I stared at the monitors I'd set up, showing feeds from every angle of my house. Nothing moved outside, no sign of him. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start, disoriented. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the security monitors. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, when something on one of the screens caught my eye. A figure standing in my backyard, looking directly at the camera. My heart leapt into my throat. I leaned closer, squinting at the grainy image. It was him. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He just stood there, staring into the camera, that same cold smile on his face. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, every monitor went black. Then, one by one, they flickered back to life. But instead of showing the outside of my house, each screen showed the same image. Me, sitting on my couch, phone in hand, looking terrified. The cameras had been hacked. He was watching me through my own security system. I threw the phone down and ran for the door, no longer caring about safety or confrontation. I just needed to get out. But as I yanked the door open, I found myself face to face with him. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. I tried to slam the door, but he was faster, stronger. He pushed his way inside, backing me into the living room. I stumbled, falling onto the couch, my eyes darting around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head, regarding me with curiosity, like I was some fascinating specimen under a microscope. "Why not?" he replied. "You people, you move into these neighborhoods thinking you're safe behind your locks and your cameras, but you never stop to consider who might already be inside." He gestured to the dark monitors. Technology is a wonderful thing, isn't it? So easy to manipulate, to use against you. Your whole life is online, did you know that? Every purchase, every search, every message. It's all there for someone who knows where to look. I felt sick. All those times I'd felt watched, all those little things he'd known about me. It hadn't been some supernatural ability. He'd simply hacked into my life, piece by digital piece. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how weak my voice sounded. His smile widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. It wasn't reassuring. "Want? Oh, I don't want anything. This isn't about want. It's about power, control, the thrill of knowing everything about someone, of being able to manipulate their life without them even realizing it." He leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "And you, my dear neighbor, have been my most entertaining subject yet." I closed my eyes, willing this all to be a nightmare. But when I opened them, he was still there, still smiling that cold, knowing smile. "Don't worry," he said, straightening up. "I'm not going to hurt you. Where's the fun in that? No, I'm going to leave now. And you're going to sit here wondering what I know, what I've seen, what I might do next. You're going to look at every camera, every computer, every phone, and wonder if I'm watching. And that, neighbor, is a far more satisfying punishment than anything physical I could do." With that, he turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I sat there, shaking, for what felt like hours. When I finally found the strength to move, I did the only thing I could think of. I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house, in that neighborhood, ever again. As I passed the "You are now leaving" sign at the edge of town, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, in the distance, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. Even from this far away, I knew it was him, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that no matter where I went, he would always be watching. Because in this digital age, there's no such thing as a fresh start. There's no escape from someone who knows how to truly watch and listen. And as I drove into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a game I never agreed to play, but could never truly leave. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. I'd been hiking for hours, enjoying the solitude, when I stumbled upon a small clearing. That's when I saw it, a weathered wooden post with a faded poster nailed to it. As I approached, my blood ran cold. The face staring back at me from the missing person's poster was my own. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. But no matter how many times I opened and closed my eyes, the image remained unchanged. Same hair, same eyes, same slight smile I always gave in photos. The only difference was the name, Sarah Thompson. Definitely not mine. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the paper, half expecting it to disappear like a mirage. But it was real, rough under my fingertips. The date on the poster was from just 3 months ago. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How was this possible? I fumbled for my phone, intending to take a picture as proof. As I raised it to snap a shot, movement caught my eye. Just beyond the clearing, partially hidden by the thick trees, stood a figure. My heart leapt into my throat. They were too far away to make out clearly, but I could feel their eyes on me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and scared in the vast forest. No response. The figure remained motionless. Watching, a chill ran down my spine, and suddenly the woods that had seemed so peaceful just moments ago felt oppressive and dangerous. I needed to get out of there. Now. I shoved my phone in my pocket, not bothering with the picture anymore. As I turned to leave, I heard it, the snap of a twig behind me. Someone was following. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about staying on the trail. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and whoever, was back there. The sound of pursuit grew louder, branches cracking, leaves rustling. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, nearly falling. The momentary slowdown was enough for my pursuer to gain ground. I could hear heavy breathing now. Close. Too close. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. But the footsteps behind me kept pace, never falling behind. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, minutes feeling like hours. My legs ached, my chest heaved, but I didn't dare stop. Not with those footsteps still pounding behind me. Finally, mercifully, I saw a break in the trees ahead. The parking lot where I'd left my car came into view. I pushed myself harder, sprinting the last few yards. As I burst out of the tree line, I risked a glance back. The forest behind me was still silent. No sign of my pursuer. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. Once inside, I slammed the door and hit the locks, then sat there, gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. What had just happened? Who was that back there? And that poster? I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing thoughts. None of this made sense. It took several minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure emerge from the woods. But the tree line remained undisturbed. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying the image on that poster, trying to find some detail, some flaw that would prove it wasn't really me. But each time, the certainty only grew. It was my face. My face on a missing person's poster dated months ago, when I knew I'd been going about my normal life. By the time I got home, darkness had fallen. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me and drawing all the curtains. Only then did I allow myself to really think about what had happened. I pulled out my phone, intending to search for any news about a missing Sarah Thompson. But as the screen lit up, my heart stopped. There, clear as day, was a text message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come to the woods today." My hands shook as I stared at the words. How could anyone have gotten my number? I hadn't told a soul where I was going today. I'd wanted solitude, had purposely left without telling anyone my plans. Another message popped up. "Did you like the poster? I made it just for you." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of sick joke, a prank gone too far. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear I'd felt in those woods, the presence watching me, it had been all too real. I spent the night huddled on my couch, jumping at every little sound. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that poster, my own face staring back at me. And behind it, always, that shadowy figure lurking in the trees. Morning came, gray and overcast. I hadn't slept a wink, but adrenaline kept me wired. I needed answers. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone again. No new messages, thank God. I opened my browser and typed in Sarah Thompson missing. The results made my blood run cold. There she was, the girl from the poster. But it wasn't me. Similar, yes, eerily so. But as I stared at the photo, I could see the subtle differences. Her nose was slightly wider, her chin a bit more pointed. We could have been sisters, maybe even twins, but we weren't the same person. The article was dated 3 months ago, just like the poster. Sarah Thompson, 28, had gone missing while hiking in the same woods I'd been in yesterday. Despite extensive searches, no trace of her had ever been found. My mind reeled. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to recreate that poster with my face. But why? What was the point of this elaborate setup? A new text alert made me jump. Unknown number again. Figured it out yet, you're next. Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't just some twisted game. This was a threat. Whoever was behind this had targeted Sarah Thompson, and now they were after me. I called the police, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. But even as the words left my mouth, I realized how crazy it all sounded. A poster with my face, a mysterious figure in the woods, threatening text messages. They took my statement, but I could hear the skepticism in the officer's voice. They promised to look into it, but I knew they wouldn't take it seriously. Days passed. I didn't leave my house, didn't answer my phone. Friends called, worried, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I, when I barely understood it myself? The text messages kept coming, always from different numbers, always untraceable. Sometimes they were vague threats, sometimes eerily specific details about my life. What I'd eaten for dinner, a phone call I'd had with my mother, the book I'd been reading in bed. I was being watched, every moment of every day. But how? A week after my encounter in the woods, I woke to find something slipped under my front door. A photograph. Me, sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my room. On the back, written in red ink, "It's time." That was it. I couldn't stay here anymore. Within an hour, I had thrown some clothes in a bag and was in my car. No destination in mind except away. As I pulled out of my driveway, my phone buzzed one last time. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. "You can't run from me, Sarah. I'll always find you." I tossed the phone out the window and pressed the gas pedal to the floor. Whoever this was, whatever sick game they were playing, I wouldn't be a part of it anymore. I'd disappear, just like the real Sarah Thompson had. But unlike her, I'd make sure I was never found. As the familiar streets of my neighborhood faded in the rearview mirror, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, just for a second, I saw a figure standing on the sidewalk. Even from a distance, I recognized the stance, the way they stood perfectly still, watching. I drove faster, my hands clenched on the steering wheel. But even as the miles stretched between me and my old life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting. And no matter how far I ran, a part of me knew the truth. In this game, there was no escape. There was only the hunt, and it had only just begun. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating an endless ribbon of asphalt stretching into the night. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway lulling me into a trance-like state. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. In the split second it took me to pass him, our eyes met. I shouldn't have stopped. God, I shouldn't have stopped. But I did. Maybe it was the exhaustion from driving all day, or maybe it was just basic human decency. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires as I came to a stop. I watched in the rearview mirror as the man jogged towards my car, his face hidden in the shadows cast by my taillights. As he got closer, I could make out more details. Tall, lean, probably in his mid-30s. He was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, a backpack slung over one shoulder. Nothing too out of the ordinary for a hitchhiker. I rolled down the passenger window as he approached. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the slight nervousness I felt. It was stupid to pick up a stranger in the middle of nowhere. I knew that. But it was too late to back out now. "Just up the road a ways," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "There's a truck stop about 50 miles from here. I can get another ride from there." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Hop in." He slid into the passenger seat, his backpack nestled between his feet. As I pulled back onto the highway, I snuck a glance at him. In the dim light of the dashboard, I could see he had sharp features, a day or two of stubble on his chin. His eyes were dark, intense. "Thanks for stopping," he said, breaking the silence. Not many people would these days. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the road. "No problem. I've been where you are. Sometimes you just need someone to give you a break, you know." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, I know. More than you can imagine." We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle as my passenger shifted in his seat. I tried to relax, to shake off the unease that had settled over me. He was just a guy down on his luck, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. "So," I said, attempting to make conversation, "what brings you out here in the middle of the night?" He turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in his gaze, something cold and calculating that hadn't been there before. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his voice low. "It's dangerous to be out here alone. You never know who you might run into." I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Just passing through," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "On my way to visit family." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Family's important. You're lucky to have them. Some of us aren't so fortunate." The way he said it made my skin crawl. There was an edge to his voice, a bitterness that hadn't been there before. I wished I could take back my offer of a ride, but we were miles from anywhere, nothing but darkness and empty roads stretching out before us. "I'm sure things will look up for you soon," I said, forcing a smile. That truck stop isn't too far now. You'll be able to get another ride in no time." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that made me flinch. "Oh, I'm not worried about getting another ride. In fact, I think I found exactly what I need right here." My heart began to race. I pressed down on the accelerator, the speedometer creeping up. Maybe if I drove fast enough, I could get to the truck stop quickly, drop him off, and be done with this whole unsettling encounter. But as the car picked up speed, he reached over and placed his hand on the steering wheel. Now, he said, his voice eerily calm. "Let's not do anything rash. Why don't you pull over? I think it's time we had a real conversation." I shook my head, panic rising in my throat. "No, I don't think that's a good idea. We're almost to the truck stop. I'll drop you off there, okay?" His grip on the steering wheel tightened. I said, "Pull over." The softness was gone from his voice, replaced by a steely command that brooked no argument. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this situation. Should I try to overpower him, crash the car, jump out? But before I could decide, he made the choice for me. In one swift motion, he grabbed the wheel and jerked it to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screeching as we careened off the road. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. We skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust, the engine sputtering and dying. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, slowly, he turned to me, that cold smile back on his face. "There," he said. "Isn't this better? Now we can really get to know each other." I fumbled for the door handle, ready to bolt, but he was faster. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in an iron grip. Ah, he tutted. "Don't be rude. I'm not done talking yet." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head, regarding me with curiosity. "Want? Oh, it's not about want. It's about need. You see, I need something from you. Something only you can give me." I felt sick. My mind conjured up all sorts of horrible scenarios, each worse than the last. "Please," I said, hating how weak I sounded. "I don't have much money, but you can take what I have. Just let me go." He laughed again, that same humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Money? You think this is about money? Oh no, my friend. What I need is far more valuable than that." He reached into his jacket pocket, and I tensed, expecting him to pull out a weapon. Instead, he produced a small, ornate box. It looked old, the metal tarnished and engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, holding it up so I could see it clearly in the dim light. I shook my head, too terrified to speak. "This," he said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone, "is a vessel, a very special vessel, and it's been empty for far too long." He opened the box, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move inside, a writhing darkness that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But then it was gone, and the box was just a box again. "You see," he continued, "I've been searching for someone like you. Someone pure, untainted, someone whose soul will fit perfectly in here." He tapped the box with one long finger. I felt the blood drain from my face. This man wasn't just dangerous. He was insane. "You're crazy," I said, finding my voice at last. "Let me go, or I'll scream." He smiled, a predator's grin that showed too many teeth. "Scream all you want. There's no one out here to hear you, and even if there was, it wouldn't matter. Once I start the ritual, nothing can stop it." He began to chant, words in a language I didn't understand. The air around us seemed to thicken, grow heavy with an unnatural energy. The box in his hand began to glow, a sickly green light seeping from between its seams. I struggled against his grip, but it was like trying to move a mountain. My strength was fading, my vision growing dim around the edges. I could feel something pulling at me, not physically, but deep inside, like my very essence was being torn away. As consciousness began to slip away, I had one last terrifying thought. This wasn't the first time he'd done this, and if someone didn't stop him, it wouldn't be the last. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was his face, triumphant and terrible, bathed in that unholy green light. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I should never have stopped. I should never have picked up the hitchhiker, because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the darkness. Sometimes they're standing right there in the light, thumb outstretched, waiting for someone kind enough or foolish enough to offer them a ride into the night. The silence was deafening. That's what struck me most as I sat on the porch of the remote cabin, a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands against the crisp morning air. No traffic noise, no hum of electricity, no distant voices, just an all-encompassing quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it left me unsettled, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I'd rented this place for a week, desperate for a break from the chaos of city life and the stress of my high-pressure job. A chance to disconnect, to recharge. Now, 3 days in, I was beginning to wonder if I'd made a mistake. The cabin itself was charming enough, rustic but comfortable, with a well-stocked kitchen and a fireplace that kept the chill at bay. But its isolation, which had seemed so appealing when I booked it, now felt oppressive. The nearest town was an hour's drive away, and I hadn't seen another soul since the property manager had dropped off the keys. As I sipped my coffee, my eyes scanned the tree line that encircled the small clearing where the cabin stood. Dense pines stretched as far as I could see, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed sort of way. But there was something else, too. A feeling I couldn't shake. Like I was being watched. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the paranoid thoughts. This was ridiculous. I was letting my imagination run wild, that's all. Too many late nights watching horror movies. Probably. Still, as I finished my coffee and headed back inside, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder one last time. The forest remained still and silent, revealing nothing. The day passed uneventfully. I hiked a nearby trail, read a book by the fire, and made myself a simple dinner. As night fell, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. The darkness seemed to press against the windows, and every creak of the cabin's old wooden frame made me jump. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the satellite reception was spotty at best. Instead, I decided to turn in early, hoping a good night's sleep would calm my nerves. I don't know what woke me. One moment I was deep in dreamless sleep, the next I was wide awake, every nerve on edge. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness you only find far from civilization. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There it was again, a soft sound, barely audible. It could have been the wind or an animal moving through the underbrush, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It sounded deliberate, like footsteps trying to be quiet. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, fumbling in the dark. The screen's sudden brightness made me squint as I checked the time. 2:17 a.m. Far too late for it to be the property manager or some lost hiker. The sound came again, closer this time. Definitely footsteps. They were slow, measured, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was out there must be able to hear it. The footsteps paused just outside my bedroom window. I could hear soft breathing now, barely audible over the frantic beating of my own heart. Then, slowly, the sound of a hand pressing against the glass. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but fear had me paralyzed. I lay there, rigid with terror, as the hand slowly dragged down the window pane, fingernails scraping against the glass. As suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The night was silent once more, but I knew better than to think it was over. Whatever was out there, it was waiting, watching. I don't know how long I lay there, every muscle tense, ears straining for any sound. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. Morning light streaming through the window woke me. For a moment, I was disoriented, the events of the night feeling like a distant nightmare. But as I became fully awake, the memory of those footsteps, that hand on the window, came rushing back. I threw off the covers and hurried to the window, half expecting to see some monstrous figure still lurking outside. But the clearing was empty, peaceful in the morning sun. It all seemed so normal, so ordinary, that I began to doubt myself. Had it all been a dream? A product of an overactive imagination and too much solitude? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I decided to investigate, to prove to myself one way or the other that I hadn't imagined it all. I pulled on my boots and a jacket and stepped out onto the porch. The morning was cool and damp, dew clinging to every surface. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and then set off to circle the cabin. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just wet grass and scattered pine needles. But as I rounded the corner to where my bedroom window was, I froze. There, clear as day in the soft earth beneath the window, were footprints. My breath caught in my throat as I knelt to examine them. They were large, much bigger than my own feet, and deep. Whoever had made them was heavy, and they didn't look like any boot print I'd ever seen. The shape was all wrong, too elongated, with strange indentations where the toes should be. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led from the forest, circled the entire cabin, and then, my blood ran cold. They led right up to the porch steps. Panic surged through me. I sprinted back to the cabin, slamming and locking the door behind me. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed the property manager's number. "Hello?" His gruff voice answered on the third ring. "There's someone out here," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other in my haste. "Last night I heard someone walking around the cabin, and now there are footprints. Strange footprints. I need help." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was oddly calm. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. Are you sure it wasn't just an animal? Bears are common in these parts." I shook my head, forgetting he couldn't see me. No, it wasn't a bear. These were footprints, human, or at least humanoid. And I heard them, walking, breathing. They touched my window. Another pause. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come out and take a look. But it'll take me about an hour to get there. Just stay inside, keep the doors locked. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand the terror I'd felt, the wrongness of those footprints. But I just mumbled a thank you and hung up. The next hour was the longest of my life. I paced the cabin, jumping at every sound, my eyes constantly darting to the windows. But nothing happened. No footsteps, no breathing, no hands on glass. When I finally heard a car pulling up, I nearly cried with relief. I ran to the door, ready to fling it open, but caution made me pause. "Hello?" I called out. "Is that you?" "It's me," came the reply. "Can you come out here? I want to take a look at those tracks you mentioned." I stepped out onto the porch, blinking in the bright sunlight. The property manager was standing by his truck, a puzzled look on his face. "Where did you say you saw these tracks?" he asked. I pointed towards the side of the cabin. "Over there, under my bedroom window. They go all the way around." He walked over to where I was pointing, his brow furrowed. I followed, ready to show him the evidence of my terrifying night. But when we reached the spot, I stopped short. The ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there at all. I don't understand," I stammered. "They were right here. Big footprints all around the cabin. I saw them just an hour ago." The property manager gave me a long look, somewhere between concern and suspicion. "Look," he said finally, "being out here alone can play tricks on your mind. Maybe you should consider cutting your stay short, head back to the city, get some rest." I wanted to argue, to insist that I wasn't crazy, that something had been here. But looking at the unmarked earth, I began to doubt myself. Had it all been in my head? As the property manager drove away, promising to check in on me later, I stood on the porch, staring out at the silent forest. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. I knew then that I couldn't stay. Whether the footprints had been real or imagined, something was wrong here. This place, this silent, watching forest, was not safe. As I packed my bags, my eyes kept darting to the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in. And when I finally got in my car and started down the long, winding road back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, just out of sight in the dense trees. I never returned to that cabin, never told anyone the full story of what happened there. But to this day, I can't look at a forest without remembering that night, those phantom footsteps, and the undeniable feeling that in the deepest, darkest woods, there are things watching and waiting that are better left undisturbed. The first time I saw her standing over my bed, I thought I was dreaming. Her silhouette was barely visible in the darkness, a shadow among shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the outline of her face, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring down at me. I blinked, and she was gone. That's when the real nightmare began. I had been excited about starting college, about the freedom and new experiences it promised. When I found out I'd be sharing a dorm room, I was even more thrilled. The thought of making a new friend, someone to share this chapter of my life with, filled me with anticipation. The day I moved in, I met Sarah. She seemed nice enough, if a bit quiet. She had long, dark hair that she wore in a messy bun, and she always seemed to be wearing oversized sweaters, even though it was still warm outside. We exchanged pleasantries as we unpacked, but she didn't say much beyond the basics. The first few weeks passed without incident. We fell into a routine, polite but distant roommates. Sarah kept to herself mostly, spending a lot of time at her desk with her headphones on. I tried to engage her in conversation a few times, but her responses were always short, her eyes never quite meeting mine. It was about a month into the semester when I first noticed something odd. I woke up in the middle of the night, that unsettling feeling you get when you know you're being watched. When I opened my eyes, I saw Sarah standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. I sat up, startled, and she quickly turned and went back to her own bed without a word. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually over breakfast. "Hey, was everything okay last night? I thought I saw you standing by my bed." Sarah looked at me, her face blank. "What? No, I was asleep all night. You must have been dreaming." I laughed it off, but something about her response felt off. Still, I pushed the thought aside. Maybe it had been a dream after all. But it happened again, and again. Always the same. I'd wake up to find Sarah standing over me, watching me sleep. Each time I brought it up, she denied it, insisting I must have been dreaming or seeing things in the dark. I started to dread going to sleep. Every night, I'd lie awake, listening for the creak of her bed, the soft pad of her feet on the floor. Sometimes I'd pretend to be asleep, keeping my eyes barely open, watching as she slowly, silently made her way to my bedside. During the day, Sarah acted as if nothing was amiss. She went about her routine as usual, quiet and withdrawn, but I noticed other things now. The way she'd sometimes stare at me when she thought I wasn't looking, how she seemed to know things about my schedule that I'd never told her. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe she had some kind of sleep disorder. I even considered that maybe I was the one with the problem, that stress or lack of sleep was making me imagine things. But then came the night that changed everything. I woke up suddenly, that familiar feeling of being watched prickling my skin. But this time, when I opened my eyes, Sarah wasn't just standing there. She was leaning over me, her face inches from mine, her eyes wide and unblinking. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, her staring into my eyes, me frozen in terror. Then, slowly, she reached out a hand and touched my cheek. Her fingers were ice cold. "You're so beautiful when you sleep," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "So peaceful, so vulnerable." I found my voice then, a strangled scream escaping my throat. Sarah jerked back, startled, and then quickly retreated to her own bed. The next morning, I confronted her. I was done with the denials, done with pretending this wasn't happening. "Sarah, we need to talk about what's been going on, about you watching me sleep." For a moment, she just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I can't help it." As her story spilled out, I felt a mix of pity and horror. Sarah had always had trouble sleeping, she explained, but it was more than just insomnia. She had a compulsion, a need to watch others sleep. It had started with her younger siblings, then progressed to friends at sleepovers. By the time she got to college, it had become an obsession she couldn't control. "When I watch you sleep," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it's the only time I feel calm, the only time my mind stops racing. I know it's wrong. I know it's creepy, but I can't stop." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt sympathy for her, understood the desperation that can come from sleepless nights. But another part, a larger part, was terrified. This wasn't normal behavior, and I didn't feel safe. I reported the situation to our resident advisor, who took it seriously enough to involve the campus counseling center. Sarah was moved to a single room and started intensive therapy. I was offered a new roommate, but after everything that had happened, I decided I'd rather have the room to myself. For weeks after Sarah moved out, I still had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I could feel eyes on me. Sometimes, I'd swear I could see a shadow by my bed, hear the soft sound of breathing that wasn't my own. But each time I turned on the light, the room was empty. Slowly, things started to get back to normal. I began to sleep through the night again, to feel safe in my own room. But I never quite shook the habit of sleeping with one eye open, always half aware of my surroundings. It was near the end of the semester when I saw Sarah again. I was walking across campus when I spotted her sitting on a bench, reading a book. She looked different, healthier somehow. The dark circles under her eyes were gone, and she'd traded her oversized sweaters for clothes that actually fit. She saw me too, and for a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. Then she stood up and walked over to me. "Hi," she said softly. I wanted to apologize again for everything. I've been getting help, and I'm doing much better now." I nodded, not sure what to say. That's good. I'm glad you're doing better." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I know what I did was wrong. Inexcusable, really. But I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was sick, but I'm getting better now." I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that this strange, unsettling chapter of my life was truly over. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw something there that made me shiver. A flicker of that same intense, unblinking stare I'd woken up to so many nights. "I have to go," I said, taking a step back. "Good luck with everything, Sarah." As I walked away, I could feel her eyes on me, following my every move. I didn't look back, but I knew if I did, I'd see her standing there, watching me with that unsettling gaze. That night, I woke up suddenly, that old familiar feeling of being watched washing over me. For a moment, I was sure I'd see Sarah standing there, leaning over me with those wide, unblinking eyes. But the room was empty, just shadows and silence. Still, as I lay there in the dark, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, Sarah was awake, thinking about me. And I knew that no matter how many locks I put on my door, no matter how far away I moved, a part of me would always be looking over my shoulder, always half expecting to see her standing there, watching me sleep. Because some things, once seen, can never truly be unseen. And some fears, once planted, never really go away. They just wait, patient and silent, for the moment when we're most vulnerable to creep back in and remind us that in the dark of night, we're never truly alone. The phone buzzed in my pocket, its vibration feeling more like a jolt of electricity through my body. I didn't want to look at it. I knew what I'd find. Another message from an unknown number, another piece of my privacy shattered. But like a moth drawn to a flame, I couldn't resist. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and read the text. "Blue looks good on you today. Matches your eyes." My heart stopped. I was wearing a blue shirt, one I'd just bought yesterday. I hadn't told anyone about it, hadn't posted any pictures online. How could they know? It had started 3 weeks ago. A simple text from an unknown number. "Have a good day at work." I'd brushed it off as a wrong number, maybe someone who'd misdialed their friend, but then they kept coming. Always from different numbers, always untraceable. At first, they were innocuous enough. Comments about the weather, about current events. But then they got personal. They knew where I worked, what I'd had for lunch, who I'd talked to that day. It was like having a shadow, one that saw everything I did but remained invisible. I'd gone to the police, of course, but what could they do? There were no threats, no demands, just someone who seemed to know everything about my life. They took a report, told me to keep a log of the messages, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. In the age of social media oversharing, who could prove these weren't just lucky guesses? But I knew better. I'd become paranoid, checking my privacy settings obsessively, even going so far as to tape over my laptop camera and smartphone lenses. I'd stopped posting on social media altogether, and still the messages came. "That new haircut suits you." "Your mom will love the birthday gift you bought her." "You should really eat more than just coffee for breakfast." Each one a knife, twisting deeper into my sense of security. I'd stopped sleeping properly, jumping at every notification, every buzz of my phone. My friends had noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd flinch when someone approached me unexpectedly. But how could I explain it to them? That someone was watching me, knew everything about me, but I had no idea who or how. I'd considered changing my number, but the rational part of my brain knew it wouldn't help. If they could get my private information so easily, a new phone number would be child's play. As I stared at the latest message about my blue shirt, a new text came in. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I snapped my head up, scanning the busy street around me. People rushed by, absorbed in their own worlds, their own phones. Any one of them could be the one sending these messages. Or maybe they were watching from one of the countless windows overlooking the street, or through the traffic cameras on every corner. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like an insect under a microscope. Every move scrutinized by an unseen observer. My palms were sweaty, my breathing shallow. I needed to get inside, away from prying eyes. I ducked into the nearest coffee shop, a small, dimly lit place I'd never been to before. As I settled into a corner booth, my back to the wall so I could see the entire room, my phone buzzed again. "The lavender latte is their specialty here. You should try it." My blood ran cold. How? How could they possibly know where I was? I hadn't planned to come here, hadn't told anyone. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision driven by panic. With shaking hands, I ordered the lavender latte. When it arrived, I stared at it, unable to take a sip. It felt like accepting defeat, like playing into their game. But what choice did I have? As I sat there, the untouched latte growing cold, I tried to think rationally. Who could be doing this? An ex-partner. But I hadn't dated anyone seriously in years. A coworker. But how would they know what I did outside of work? A neighbor. But then how did they follow me when I left home? My mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Was I being targeted by some high-tech stalker? Had I unknowingly angered someone with the resources to mount this kind of surveillance? Or was I simply losing my mind? The worst part was the not knowing who was watching or why. Were they getting some sick pleasure out of my fear? Were they building up to something worse? Or was this all some elaborate prank that I was failing to understand? I must have sat there for hours, lost in my spiraling thoughts. The barista had given up trying to make eye contact, probably assuming I was just another weirdo using their shop as a refuge. As the afternoon light began to fade, my phone buzzed again. "It's getting late. You should head home. Don't forget to pick up milk on the way. You're almost out." I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. Of course they knew I needed milk. Of course they were telling me to go home, like a concerned friend rather than the tormentor they were. As I stepped out of the coffee shop, the cool evening air hit my face, and I made a decision. I wasn't going home. Not to my apartment where every corner, every shadow might be hiding a camera or a microphone. I turned and walked in the opposite direction of my usual route. For hours I wandered the city, down unfamiliar streets, through neighborhoods I'd never visited. I took random turns, doubled back on myself, anything to shake the feeling of being followed. But with every step my phone would buzz. That's an interesting part of town. Never took you for an architecture buff. The pizza place on the corner is fantastic. You should grab a slice. Your friend Sarah lives 2 blocks from here. Why don't you pay her a visit? It was useless. No matter where I went, they knew. As midnight approached, exhaustion began to set in. My feet ached, my head throbbed, and the weight of constant surveillance pressed down on me like a physical thing. Finally, defeated, I made my way home. As I approached my building, a final text came through. "Welcome back. Sleep well. We'll talk again tomorrow." I collapsed onto my bed, not bothering to change clothes or turn off the lights. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something that chilled me to my core. Despite the fear, despite the invasion of privacy, a small part of me had begun to anticipate the messages, to wonder what they'd say next, what new detail of my life they'd comment on. Was this Stockholm Syndrome? Had my tormentor become, in some twisted way, my only real companion? The only one who truly saw me, knew me? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one last thought flickered through my mind. What if, tomorrow, the messages stopped coming? What if I woke up to silence, to a world where no one was watching, where no one cared about the minute details of my day? And why did that thought terrify me even more than the messages themselves? In that moment, hovering on the edge of sleep, I understood the true horror of my situation. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy, the constant surveillance. It was the way it had reshaped my world, rewired my brain. I had become addicted to being watched, dependent on the validation of this unseen observer. As consciousness slipped away, my last waking thought was a silent plea to my phone, sitting silent on the nightstand. Please let there be a message in the morning. And in that plea, I recognized the final victory of my tormentor. They hadn't just invaded my life. They had become an essential part of it. The hairbrush wasn't where I'd left it. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, dripping wet from the shower, and stared at the empty spot on the counter. I always left it there, right next to my toothbrush holder. Always. But now it was gone, and a chill that had nothing to do with my damp skin crept down my spine. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. For weeks now, I'd been noticing small things out of place in my apartment. At first, I'd brushed it off as forgetfulness or stress. A misplaced book here, a moved coffee mug there. Nothing major, nothing worth worrying about. But as I wrapped myself in a towel and began searching for my hairbrush, a growing sense of unease settled in my stomach. I found it eventually, tucked away in a drawer I never use. As I ran it through my tangled hair, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I'd lived in this apartment for 3 years, ever since I'd landed my job at the marketing firm downtown. It was small but cozy, a third-floor walk-up in an old building with character. I'd always felt safe here, comfortable, but lately, that feeling of security had been slowly eroding, replaced by a constant, low-level anxiety that I couldn't quite shake. It started small. I'd come home from work to find a window I was sure I'd closed slightly ajar. Or I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard footsteps in the living room, only to find everything quiet and undisturbed when I went to check. I told myself I was being paranoid. That old buildings made noises. That memory could play tricks on you. But deep down, a part of me knew something wasn't right. The incident with the hairbrush was the tipping point. As I got dressed for work that morning, my mind raced with possibilities. Was someone breaking into my apartment while I was out? But nothing was ever missing, just moved. And how would they get in? I always locked my door, and I lived on the 3rd floor. I considered talking to my landlord, but what would I say? I think someone's coming into my apartment and slightly rearranging my things. It sounded crazy even in my head. Instead, I decided to set a trap. That evening after work, I meticulously photographed every room in my apartment, capturing the exact position of every object. Then I scattered a fine layer of talcum powder along the windowsills and in front of the door. If anyone came in, they'd leave footprints. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every distant siren had me sitting bolt upright in bed, heart racing. But morning came, and when I checked, the powder was undisturbed. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling foolish for my paranoia. But then I noticed it. The plant on my coffee table, the one I'd photographed the night before, was turned slightly to the left. Just a few degrees, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it, but I was looking, and I saw it. My hands shook as I compared the photo on my phone to the reality in front of me. There was no doubt. The plant had moved, but the powder was untouched. It was impossible. I called in sick to work that day, my mind reeling. I rechecked every inch of my apartment, looking for any sign of intrusion, any explanation for what was happening. But there was nothing. No forced locks, no open windows, nothing out of place except for that one, slightly rotated plant. As the day wore on, my fear began to morph into anger. Someone was messing with me. They had to be. But how? And why? I was nobody special, just an ordinary person living an ordinary life. Why would anyone go to such lengths to torment me? That night, I didn't set any traps. Instead, I waited. I sat in my darkened living room, every light off, barely breathing. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My eyes strained in the darkness, watching for any movement, any sign of an intruder. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I heard it. A soft scraping sound, so faint I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening so intently. It was coming from the kitchen. My heart pounding, I rose silently from my chair and crept towards the sound. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the window. At first, I saw nothing out of place. Then, a movement caught my eye. The drawer next to the sink was slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding open. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. There was no one there, no hand pulling the drawer open. It was moving on its own, inch by agonizing inch. A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, The drawer slammed shut with a bang that seemed to shake the whole apartment. I stumbled backwards, my mind refusing to process what I'd just witnessed. In a panic, I flipped on every light in the apartment, searched every corner, every hiding spot. But I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat huddled on my couch, lights blazing, until dawn broke. As soon as it was a reasonable hour, I called my landlord, my voice shaking as I demanded he change my locks immediately. He arrived that afternoon, looking concerned but skeptical as I babbled about intruders and moving objects. But as he examined my door, his expression changed. "This is odd," he muttered, peering closely at the lock. "What? What's odd?" I demanded, peering over his shoulder. He pointed to some faint scratches around the keyhole. "These marks, they're not from normal key use. It's like someone's been picking your lock, regularly." My blood ran cold, so I wasn't crazy. Someone had been getting into my apartment. But why? And how were they doing it without leaving any other trace? The landlord changed the locks, installing a new, more secure system. He offered to call the police, but I declined. What would I tell them? That someone was breaking in just to move my things slightly? It sounded insane. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, secure in the knowledge that my new locks would keep out any intruders. But when I woke the next morning, that sense of security evaporated instantly. There, on my nightstand, was a single key. A key that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. A key that, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized would fit perfectly into my new lock. I didn't even bother checking the rest of the apartment. I threw some clothes into a bag, grabbed my phone and wallet, and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, driving with no real destination in mind, just needing to be away. As the city faded in my rearview mirror, my phone buzzed with a text, unknown number. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. "You forgot your hairbrush. Don't worry, I'll keep it safe until you return." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat, my hands shaking too badly to hold it. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed down harder on the accelerator, putting as much distance as I could between me and my apartment. But even as I drove, a horrible realization settled over me. It didn't matter how far I ran. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this. They weren't confined to my apartment. They could reach me anywhere. The road stretched out before me, empty and foreboding. And for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of the phrase, "no escape." Because how do you run from something that can apparently be everywhere, see everything, and leave no trace? As the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, alone in my car on an empty highway, I wasn't really alone. That somewhere, somehow, they were watching, waiting. And sooner or later, I would have to go home. Because in the end, there's nowhere else to go. And they know it. The engine's low rumble was the only sound breaking the pre-dawn silence as I pulled into my driveway, exhausted from another graveyard shift at the hospital. That's when I saw it. The same dark sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted black, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. It had been there every night this week, always in the same spot, always silent and still. At first, I'd thought nothing of it. Cars parked on the street all the time in our quiet suburban neighborhood. But as the days passed and it never moved, a nagging sense of unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. I sat in my car, engine idling, staring at the sedan. Was there someone inside? The windows were too dark to see through, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My hand hovered over the gear shift, ready to reverse out of the driveway and, what? Drive away? Call the police? I was being ridiculous. It was just a parked car. Taking a deep breath, I turned off the engine and got out. The cool morning air hit my face, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly cut grass and early spring flowers. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. But as I walked to my front door, I could feel eyes on my back, boring into me from behind those tinted windows. Inside, I went through my usual post-shift routine, kicking off my shoes, dropping my bag, heading straight for the shower. But my movements felt mechanical, my mind still fixated on that car. As the hot water washed away the hospital smell, I tried to rationalize my fears. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor's guest. Maybe someone had car trouble and was waiting for a tow. But deep down, I knew those explanations didn't fit. The car was too new, too sleek to be broken down, and it had been there for days, always in the exact same spot. After my shower, wrapped in my robe, I peeked through the blinds. The sedan was still there, a dark silhouette against the brightening sky. And then I saw it, a small movement, barely perceptible. The driver's side window lowered just a crack, then closed again. My heart raced. Someone was definitely in there, watching, waiting. But for what? I spent the day in a haze of paranoia and exhaustion, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the street through the blinds. The car remained, unmoved, its presence a constant reminder that something wasn't right. As night fell, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. With shaking hands, I dialed the non-emergency police number. "I'd like to report a suspicious vehicle," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I described the car, its location, how long it had been there. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost bored. "Has the vehicle violated any parking laws? Has anyone from the vehicle approached you or your property?" "Well, no, but I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't do anything about a legally parked car on a public street. If you see any suspicious activity, please call us back." I hung up, feeling helpless and slightly foolish. Of course they couldn't do anything. What was I expecting? For them to storm out and arrest someone for the crime of parking? That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the car's door opening, a shadowy figure emerging and approaching my house. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and sat by the window, watching. The street was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. The sedan sat there, dark and imposing. As I watched, headlights appeared at the end of the street. Another car, moving slowly. It passed the sedan, then stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a man got out. He was tall, dressed all in black. Even from a distance, I could see he was muscular, his movements precise and deliberate. He walked to the sedan and leaned down to the driver's window. There was a brief exchange, too quiet for me to hear. Then he straightened up and looked directly at my house. I ducked down, heart pounding. Had he seen me? I waited a few seconds, then slowly peeked out again. The man was gone, and the other car was driving away, but the sedan remained. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my house, of not knowing what might happen while I was gone. I spent the day alternating between pacing nervously and sitting by the window, watching. As evening approached, I saw movement again. The sedan's door opened and someone stepped out. It was a woman, middle-aged, unremarkable looking. She stretched, walked around the car, then got back in. The whole thing took less than a minute, but it was enough to confirm my fears. Someone was definitely living in that car, watching my house. That night, I broke down and called my brother. As soon as he answered, words poured out of me in a frantic jumble. I told him about the car, the woman, the man in black, my growing fear and paranoia. There was a long pause when I finished. Then, "Have you been sleeping okay? Eating properly?" I felt a stab of betrayal. "What? Yes, of course. Did you hear what I said? Someone is watching me." He sighed. "Look, I know things have been tough since Mom died, and working those night shifts can't be easy. Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional, I mean." "I'm not crazy," I snapped. This is real. Come over and see for yourself if you don't believe me. Okay, he said, his voice placating. I'll come by tomorrow after work. Just try to get some rest, all right? I hung up, angry and hurt. But a small part of me wondered, was I losing it? Was the stress and grief finally catching up with me, making me see threats where there were none? The next day crawled by. I alternated between watching the street and trying to distract myself with TV, books, anything. But my eyes kept being drawn back to that car, its presence a constant, gnawing worry. When my brother finally arrived, I practically dragged him to the window. There, I said, pointing. See? It's been there for over a week now. He peered out, frowning. The black sedan? Are you sure it hasn't moved? Maybe different cars just park in the same spot. I'm sure, I insisted. Watch it long enough. You'll see someone in there. He stayed for a couple of hours, humoring me. We sat by the window, talking in low voices, but nothing happened. The car sat there, silent and still. As he was leaving, my brother placed a hand on my shoulder. Look, he said gently, I think you might be working too hard. Why don't you take a few days off? Maybe go visit Dad for a while. I nodded, not having the energy to argue. But as soon as he was gone, I returned to my vigil by the window. It was nearly midnight when I saw it. The sedan's door opened, and the woman got out again. But this time, she didn't just stretch and get back in. She looked directly at my house, raised her hand, and waved. I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. She had seen me. She knew I was watching. This wasn't paranoia or stress or grief. This was real. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, it buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. We see you, Sarah. We've always seen you. It's time to come home now. I dropped the phone, a scream building in my throat. How did they know my name? What did they mean? Come home. As panic overwhelmed me, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The soft click of a key turning in a lock. My front door swung open, and there, silhouetted in the doorway, was the man in black. Hello, Sarah, he said, his voice oddly gentle. We've been waiting a long time for you to notice us. Are you ready to remember now? As he stepped into the light, something in my mind shifted. Memories, long buried, began to surface. The car, the watchers, they had always been there, hadn't they? Waiting for me to wake up, to remember who I really was. I took a step forward, my fear melting away, replaced by a strange sense of homecoming. I'm ready, I heard myself say. And as I walked out of the house I had thought was my home, towards the car that had been my guardian, I realized that the life I had been living was the dream, and now, finally, I was waking up. The headlights in my rearview mirror were relentless, two piercing eyes that had been fixed on me for the last hour. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, as I pushed my old Honda to its limits on the winding mountain road. It was well past midnight, and I hadn't seen another car since I left the last gas station 50 miles back. No one, except for the vehicle that had been tailing me ever since. At first, I thought nothing of it. Late-night drives often come with temporary road companions, other solitary travelers sharing the same stretch of asphalt for a while. But as the miles ticked by and every turn I took was mirrored by those unwavering headlights, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. I was on my way back from visiting my sister in Colorado, a trip I'd made dozens of times before. Usually, I enjoyed these long drives, the solitude, the ever-changing landscape, the time to think. But tonight, every shadow seemed menacing, every curve in the road a potential ambush. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just going in the same direction. Maybe they were afraid of getting lost and were using me as a guide. But deep down, I knew better. The way they matched my every move, sped up when I did, slowed down in perfect sync. This was no coincidence. I considered pulling over, but the thought of stopping, of being a sitting duck for whoever was in that car, made my stomach churn. So I kept driving, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, watching those headlights that never seemed to get any closer or fall behind. As the road wound higher into the mountains, a plan began to form in my mind. I knew these roads well, had driven them countless times in daylight and darkness. Up ahead was a lookout point, a wide shoulder where tourists stopped to admire the view. If I could just make it there, maybe I could confront my pursuer, or at least get a better look at them. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the engine protesting as I pushed it to its limits. The headlights behind me grew slightly dimmer as I gained some distance. My heart raced, hope mingling with fear as the lookout point came into view. With a screech of tires, I swerved onto the shoulder, throwing the car into park and killing the lights in one fluid motion. I ducked down in my seat, peering over the dashboard, waiting. Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, those headlights appeared around the bend. They slowed as they approached the lookout, and for a moment I thought they would stop. But they didn't. They cruised past, continuing down the mountain road at a leisurely pace. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Had I imagined it all? Was it just paranoia born from too many hours on the road? But as I sat there trying to calm my racing heart, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The car, a dark sedan that I could now see clearly in the moonlight, pulled a U-turn about a quarter mile down the road. It was coming back. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The car sputtered to life just as the sedan's headlights illuminated my rearview mirror once again. I peeled out of the lookout point, gravel spraying behind me as I fishtailed back onto the road. The sedan was closing in fast, no longer maintaining that eerie distance. Whoever was driving it had decided to make their move. The next few miles were a blur of hairpin turns and steep drops. I took each curve as fast as I dared, the tires squealing in protest. But no matter how fast I went, those headlights stayed fixed behind me, growing larger with each passing minute. My mind raced faster than my car. Who were they? What did they want? I ran through my life, trying to think of anyone who might wish me harm, but came up empty. I was just an ordinary person, a high school teacher with a mundane life. I had no enemies, no dark secrets. So why was this happening? As we rounded another bend, I saw something that made my heart leap. Headlights coming towards us. Another car, the first I'd seen in hours. Maybe if there was a witness, my pursuer would back off. But as the approaching car got closer, my hope turned to horror. It was another dark sedan, identical to the one behind me. And it was on my side of the road, coming straight at me. I had seconds to react. With a hard jerk of the steering wheel, I swerved onto the narrow shoulder, my passenger side mirror scraping against the rock face of the mountain. The oncoming sedan missed me by inches, the rush of air as it passed rocking my car. In my rearview mirror, I watched as it expertly spun around, falling into formation behind the first sedan. Now I had two pursuers. Tears blurred my vision as the reality of my situation sank in. This was coordinated, planned. Whatever was happening, it was bigger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. I was so focused on the cars behind me that I almost missed the roadblock ahead. Two more sedans were parked horizontally across the road, their headlights off. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching as I skidded towards them. For a wild moment, I considered trying to ram through the blockade, but at the speed I was going, and it would be suicide. Instead, I wrenched the wheel to the side, sending my car into a spinning skid. The world tilted and whirled around me. I caught glimpses of headlights, of the stark mountain face, of the guardrail that was the only thing between me and a sheer drop. And then, with a sickening crunch of metal, everything went still. My car had come to rest against the guardrail, the passenger side crumpled like a tin can. By some miracle, I was still conscious, though every part of me ached. Through the spiderweb cracks of my windshield, I could see figures approaching, their features obscured by the glare of headlights. As my door was wrenched open, I found myself face to face with a man in a dark suit. His expression was impassive as he looked down at me. "Sarah Connor?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. I blinked, confusion momentarily overriding my fear. "What? No, my name is Jennifer Hayes." The man's brow furrowed slightly. He turned to one of his companions. "Check the photo again." Another suited figure approached, holding up a phone. They looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "It's not her," the second man said. "The target must have switched vehicles." The first man sighed, sounding almost bored. "Clean this up. Make it look like an accident. We need to move quickly if we're going to catch up to the real target." As hands reached in to unbuckle my seatbelt, my mind struggled to process what was happening. They had the wrong person. All of this, the chase, the fear, the crash, it was a case of mistaken identity. "Wait," I managed to croak out. "Who are you? What's going on?" The man looked down at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes. You were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. If it's any consolation, you won't remember any of this." As he raised his hand, I caught a glimpse of something metallic and sleek. There was a soft hiss, a sharp prick on my neck, and then nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me I'd been in a car accident, that I'd lost control on the mountain road and crashed into the guardrail. A passing motorist had found me and called for help, but as I lay there, listening to the steady beep of monitors, flashes of memory surfaced. Relentless headlights, the screech of tires, men in dark suits, a name, Sarah Connor. Yet even as these images flitted through my mind, they felt unreal, like scenes from a movie I'd watched long ago. The doctors said memory loss was common with head injuries, that these might be fragments of dreams or hallucinations caused by the trauma. I nodded along, agreeing that it must be so. But deep down, in a part of me that felt raw and exposed, I knew. Something had happened that night on the mountain, something that defied explanation, and somewhere out there, a woman named Sarah Connor was running for her life, unknowingly protected by my mistaken identity. As I drifted off to sleep, lulled by painkillers and exhaustion, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ordinary life had brushed against something extraordinary, and that somewhere, in the shadows of our world, a chase was still ongoing, relentless, unstoppable, and utterly terrifying. The first red flag should have been the way he smiled. It was too wide, too perfect, like he'd practiced it in the mirror 1,000 times. But I was too caught up in the excitement of meeting my new neighbor to notice. If only I'd paid attention to that nagging feeling in my gut, maybe things would have turned out differently. I'd just moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, a quaint little house with a white picket fence. The American dream, right? The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. It wasn't until the 4th day that I met Jack. He came over with a plate of cookies, the perfect picture of neighborly friendliness. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, flashing that too-perfect smile. "I'm Jack. I live next door." I invited him in, grateful for the company after days of solitude. We chatted over coffee, and he seemed nice enough. He asked all the right questions. Where I was from, what I did for work, if I was settling in okay. But there was something in the way he listened, head tilted slightly, eyes never leaving my face, that made me feel exposed. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You know," he said, that smile still firmly in place, This neighborhood is very safe, but you can never be too careful. I'd be happy to keep an eye on your place when you're out." I thanked him, thinking it was a kind offer. I didn't realize then that it wasn't an offer at all. It was a statement of intent. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice Jack more and more. He was always there, puttering in his yard when I left for work, taking out his trash when I came home. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. But then I began to feel his eyes on me, even when I couldn't see him. One evening, as I was watering my new flower beds, Jack appeared at the fence. "Those flowers are coming along nicely," he said, making me jump. I hadn't heard him approach. "Oh, thanks," I said, trying to calm my racing heart. "I'm still learning. Gardening isn't really my forte." He leaned on the fence, that smile never wavering. "I could give you some tips if you'd like. I've got quite the green thumb." His eyes flicked to my house, then back to me. "I noticed you left your bedroom window open last night. You might want to be careful about that. Like I said, you can never be too safe." A chill ran down my spine. How did he know which window was my bedroom, and why was he watching my windows at night? "Right," I managed to say. "Thanks for the advice." That night, I double-checked every lock, making sure all the windows were closed and curtains drawn, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The incidents started piling up. I'd come home to find my porch light on when I was sure I'd turned it off. My mail would be slightly out of place in the mailbox, as if someone had rifled through it. Once, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move past my kitchen window late at night. Each time, Jack was there the next day with a friendly wave and a word of caution. "I heard a noise last night. Came out to check, but didn't see anything. Just wanted to make sure you're okay." Or, "I noticed a strange car driving by yesterday. Can't be too careful these days." It was always the same refrain. Can't be too careful. And always that same unwavering smile. I started to dread coming home. My house, which should have been my sanctuary, felt like a cage. I knew Jack was watching, always watching. Things came to a head one Saturday afternoon. I was in my backyard, trying to enjoy the sunshine despite my constant unease, when I heard Jack's voice. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I turned to see him standing at the fence, that eerie smile plastered on his face. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I was thinking," he continued, "maybe I could come over later, help you install some security cameras. I've got a whole system at my place. I could show you how it works." The thought of Jack having cameras pointed at my house made me feel physically ill. "That's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm good." His smile flickered for just a moment, a flash of something dark crossing his face. Now, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "I really think it would be for the best. After all, I've been keeping an eye on things for you, but I can't be everywhere at once." I felt a surge of anger cut through my fear. "I don't need you to keep an eye on things, Jack. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." He tilted his head, regarding me with an expression that made me think of a predator sizing up its prey. "Oh, I don't think you are," he said softly. "I don't think you have any idea how dangerous the world can be. But don't worry, I'll keep you safe, whether you want me to or not." I didn't sleep that night. I sat up, lights off, peering through a crack in my curtains, and there he was, standing in his darkened window, staring at my house. He stood there for hours, unmoving, watching. The next day, I called the police. I told them everything, the constant watching, the comments about my windows and lights, the veiled threats. The officer listened patiently, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "Has he actually done anything threatening?" the officer asked. "Entered your property without permission? Made any explicit threats?" "Well, no, but I'm sorry, ma'am, but being overly friendly isn't a crime. If he trespasses or makes any direct threats, give us a call. But right now, there's not much we can do." I hung up, feeling helpless and alone. That night, I heard noises outside my house, footsteps on the porch, the creak of a floorboard, the softest scratch at my bedroom window. But every time I looked, there was nothing there. Just the darkness and the knowledge that somewhere out there, Jack was watching. Days passed, and the feeling of being constantly observed began to take its toll. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, jumped at every sound. My coworkers noticed, asked if everything was okay. But how could I explain that my neighbor had appointed himself my unsolicited protector, that he was slowly driving me insane with his constant surveillance? One night, about a month after Jack's thinly veiled threat, I woke to the sound of my front door opening. My blood ran cold as I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call 911 when my bedroom door swung open. Jack stood there, that eternal smile still on his face, but his eyes were wild, feverish. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here to keep you safe. I saw your curtain move and I was worried. But don't worry, I'll always be here to protect you." I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, Jack raised his hand. In it was a syringe, filled with some clear liquid. "Shh," he whispered, stepping closer. "This is for your own good. You'll see, I'm just keeping you safe." As he approached the bed, needle glinting in the moonlight, I realized the true horror of my situation. Jack didn't want to hurt me. In his twisted mind, he genuinely believed he was protecting me. And that was far more terrifying than any conventional threat. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged for the bedside lamp, swinging it with all my might. It connected with Jack's head with a sickening crunch, and he crumpled to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. I ran, barefoot and in my pajamas, out of the house and into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, gasping and sobbing. This time, they believed me. They found Jack in my bedroom, the syringe still clutched in his hand. A search of his house revealed a room filled with monitors, showing feeds from hidden cameras he'd planted all over the neighborhood. My house had more cameras trained on it than any other. Jack was arrested, charged with breaking and entering, attempted assault, and a host of other crimes. But even as they led him away, he kept smiling that unnerving smile. "I was just trying to keep her safe," he told the officers. "You'll see. She needs me. She'll realize that soon enough." I sold my house soon after. I couldn't bear to live there anymore, knowing how thoroughly my privacy had been violated. As I packed up my belongings, I caught a glimpse of the house next door. The curtains twitched, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw that familiar, too-wide smile. But that was impossible. Jack was in jail. It was just my imagination, my nerves still frayed from the ordeal. Wasn't it? As I drove away for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, Jack was still watching. And that smile, that terrible, unchanging smile, would haunt my dreams for years to come. The rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement was the only sound breaking the early morning silence. It was supposed to be my escape, my daily ritual to clear my head before the chaos of work. But for the past week, it had become something else entirely. A game of cat and mouse, one where I wasn't sure which role I was playing. It started last Tuesday. I was halfway through my usual route in the park when I first noticed him. A tall man, probably in his early 40s, wearing a red baseball cap and a gray jogging suit. Nothing remarkable about him, really, except for the fact that he was keeping pace with me, always staying about 50 yards behind. At first, I didn't think much of it. The park was a popular spot for joggers, and it wasn't unusual to see the same faces day after day. But as I finished my run and headed home, I glanced back one last time. He was still there, maintaining that exact distance. The next morning, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But there he was again, red cap bobbing in the distance as I started my run. Same distance, same pace. I tried to shake him off, sprinting ahead and taking a different path. But somehow, he always reappeared, that unchanging gap between us. By the fourth day, I was thoroughly unnerved. I tried varying my route, my timing, even skipping a day. But it didn't matter. Every morning, there he was, a silent shadow dogging my steps. Which brings me to today. As I laced up my running shoes, my hands trembling slightly, I knew I had to confront this. I couldn't live with the constant fear, the gnawing uncertainty. Today, I would face my stalker. I set out at my usual pace, my heart already racing before I'd gone a block. The park loomed ahead, its tree-lined paths both inviting and menacing in the soft morning light. As I entered, I scanned the area, looking for that telltale red cap. For a moment, I thought maybe he wasn't there. Maybe it had all been in my head, a product of an overactive imagination. But then I saw him, emerging from a side path, falling into step behind me with practiced ease. I ran for about 10 minutes, my mind whirling with possible plans. Should I confront him directly, try to lose him and double back, call for help? In the end, impulse took over. As we approached a bend in the path, I suddenly veered off into a small clearing, hidden from the main trail by a cluster of bushes. I waited, my breath coming in short gasps, more from fear than exertion. Would he follow? Had I finally broken the pattern? Footsteps approached, slowing as they neared my hiding spot. And then he was there, standing at the edge of the clearing, his eyes locked on mine. Up close, I could see he was older than I'd thought, lines etched deeply around his eyes and mouth. But it was his expression that caught me off guard. He didn't look threatening or malicious. He looked sad. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound brave. He sighed, a heavy sound full of weariness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I needed to see you run." Confusion replaced some of my fear. "What? Why?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them, they were shining with unshed tears. "You remind me of my daughter. The way you run, your build, even your hair. It's so much like her." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Your daughter?" He nodded, pulling off the red cap and twisting it in his hands. "Sarah. She was a runner, too, captain of her high school track team. She used to run in this park every morning." His voice cracked on the last word. "Was?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "She died," he said simply. "Drunk driver? 2 years ago. She was out for her morning run, just like always." He swerved onto the path. They said she didn't suffer." I stood there, stunned. This wasn't at all what I had expected. The man I'd built up in my mind as a dangerous stalker was just a grieving father, lost in his memories. "I'm so sorry," I said, meaning it. "But why follow me? Why not just talk to me?" He shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. "I tried that first day, but when I got close, when I saw your face and realized you weren't her, I couldn't. It was easier to pretend, just for a little while each day, that she was still here, still running." I felt tears pricking at my own eyes. "I understand, I think. But you have to know how scary this was for me. To feel like I was being stalked, day after day." Shame crossed his face. "I know, I'm sorry. I never meant to frighten you, I couldn't help myself. Watching you run, it was like having a piece of her back. But I know it was wrong." We stood there in silence for a moment, the morning birds providing a surreal soundtrack to this unexpected encounter. Finally, I made a decision. What was her name? Your daughter. Sarah, he said, his voice soft with love and pain. Sarah Elizabeth Parker. I took a deep breath. Tell me about her, about Sarah. What was she like? For a moment he looked startled. Then slowly, that sad smile returned, tinged now with gratitude. She was amazing, stubborn as hell, but with the biggest heart. She could run like the wind, but she'd always stop to help someone in need. As he talked, we started walking. Not running, just a slow meander through the park as the sun climbed higher in the sky. He told me about Sarah's dreams of becoming an Olympic runner, about her volunteer work at the local animal shelter, about the way she'd scrunch up her nose when she laughed. By the time we completed a lap of the park, I felt like I knew Sarah, and I understood, in some small way, the depth of this man's loss. We paused at the park entrance. I'm James, by the way, he said, extending his hand. James Parker. I shook it, noting the strength in his grip. Emily, I replied. Emily Chen. He nodded, then looked down at his feet. I won't bother you again. I'm truly sorry for scaring you. I'll find another park to run in. I considered for a moment. What he had done was undeniably creepy, born of grief though it was. But I couldn't help feeling a wave of compassion for this broken man. How about this? I said slowly. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we meet here. We can run together, and you can tell me more about Sarah, but no more following me, okay? And if I ever feel uncomfortable, this stops immediately. The look of gratitude and hope that crossed his face was almost painful to see. You'd do that. You're not afraid of me. I shook my head. Not anymore. But this is conditional, understand? Any hint of anything inappropriate, and I'm out. Of course, he said quickly. I understand. And thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. As I watched him walk away, his shoulders a little straighter than before, I marveled at the strange turns life could take. The man I had feared as a stalker was just a father, lost in his grief. And I, in some small way, had become a lifeline for him. I knew it was risky. Knew that some would say I was being foolish, naive even. But as I started my run home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in days. Sometimes, the monsters we imagine are just people, broken by life and looking for a way to put themselves back together. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to look past our fear, we might just find a way to help them, and ourselves, in the process. As I rounded the corner towards my street, I made a mental note to look up Sarah Elizabeth Parker when I got home, to learn more about the girl whose memory had inadvertently turned my morning runs into a week of terror, and whose father I had now, somewhat improbably, agreed to help. Life, I realized, was full of unexpected twists, and sometimes, the most frightening encounters can lead to the most profound connections. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click, but the room that greeted me was anything but familiar. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the knob, as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This was my room number 412, the same room I'd checked into just hours ago. But everything inside, from the furniture layout to the color of the walls, was completely different. My mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Had I somehow gotten off on the wrong floor? But no, I double-checked the number on the door. Was I more tired than I thought? Hallucinating from jet lag, perhaps? I blinked hard, but the scene before me remained unchanged. Cautiously, I stepped inside, my suitcase forgotten in the hallway. The room was immaculate, with no sign of the mess I'd left behind when I'd rushed out for my meeting. The bed was made with military precision, adorned with pillows I didn't recognize. A sleek laptop sat on the desk where my clunky work computer had been. Even the view from the window was different. Instead of the bustling street I'd seen earlier, I now looked out over a serene courtyard. "Hello?" I called out, half expecting, hoping even, that someone would pop out and explain this elaborate prank, but only silence answered me. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the front desk and demand an explanation, but as I pulled it from my pocket, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The wallpaper, which had been a picture of my dog, was now a generic landscape. The apps were rearranged, and there were several I didn't recognize. With shaking hands, I navigated to the contacts. Names I'd never seen before filled the screen. My family, my friends, my colleagues, all gone, replaced by strangers. Panic began to set in. This wasn't just a mix-up with room assignments. Something was very, very wrong. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway looked the same as it had before. Neutral carpeting, bland artwork on the walls, room numbers neatly displayed on each door. But now it felt sinister, as if at any moment the familiar could shift into the unknown. I made my way to the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby with more force than necessary. As the doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirrored wall and gasped. The face staring back at me was my own. And yet, not. My hair was shorter, styled differently. A small scar I'd never seen before marked my left cheek. The elevator dinged, announcing my arrival at the lobby. I stumbled out, my mind reeling. The same concierge who had checked me in earlier was at the desk. I approached him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me," I said. "There seems to be some confusion with my room. I'm in 412, but..." Mr. Johnson," the concierge interrupted with a warm smile. "How are you enjoying your stay?" I blinked, momentarily thrown. "I'm sorry. What did you call me?" His smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Johnson. That is your name, isn't it? David Johnson?" I opened my mouth to protest, to insist that no, my name was Michael Chen, that I was an accountant from Chicago here for a conference, not whoever this David Johnson was. But something stopped me. A flicker of doubt, a seed of uncertainty that had taken root the moment I'd opened that hotel room door. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Of course, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit disoriented." The concierge's smile returned full force. "Perfectly understandable, sir. The time difference can be quite challenging. Is there anything I can help you with?" I shook my head, mumbling something about needing fresh air. As I turned away from the desk, I caught sight of a large mirror hanging in the lobby. The face that looked back at me was the same one I'd seen in the elevator, familiar in its features, yet undeniably changed. And the name the concierge had used. It felt right in a way I couldn't explain. I stumbled out of the hotel onto the busy street. The city around me was both familiar and foreign. I recognized the skyline, the rhythm of traffic, the general layout. But small details were off. Store names I didn't know, advertisements for products I'd never heard of. As I wandered aimlessly, my mind grappled with the impossible. Somehow, in the span of a few hours, I had stepped into a life that wasn't mine. Or was it? With each passing moment, memories of my old life, of Michael Chen, felt more like a dream, fading at the edges. My phone buzzed in my pocket. With trepidation, I pulled it out. A text message from someone named Sarah lit up the screen. "Hey babe, how's the trip going? Don't forget we have dinner with my parents on Saturday." I stared at the message, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away, to run back to the hotel and demand answers. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, felt a surge of affection for this Sarah. I could almost picture her face, could almost hear her laugh. As I stood there on the busy sidewalk, people rushing past me, I felt reality shifting. Memories began to surface, memories of a life I hadn't lived just hours ago. I remembered proposing to Sarah on a beach at sunset. I remembered my job as a software engineer, the project I was in town to present. I remembered my parents, my childhood home, my first car. But at the same time, I remembered being Michael Chen. I remembered my small apartment in Chicago, my job at the accounting firm, my golden retriever waiting for me back home. Two sets of memories, two lives, existing simultaneously in my mind. And with each passing second, one was growing stronger while the other faded. I found myself walking back to the hotel, my feet moving of their own accord. In the elevator, I studied my reflection. No, David Johnson's reflection. The scar on my cheek. I knew how I'd gotten it now. A cycling accident when I was 15. The shorter hair. Sarah had convinced me to try a new style last month. Back in room 412, everything looked right. My laptop, my clothes in the closet, the book I'd been reading on the nightstand. All David Johnson's possessions, all familiar now. I sat on the bed, my head in my hands. What was happening to me? Was I going insane? Had I always been David Johnson and Michael Chen was just some elaborate delusion? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Love you. Can't wait to see you on Friday. Almost without thinking, I typed back, love you too. Miss you. And I did. I missed Sarah. I missed our apartment, our life together. These feelings, these memories, they felt real. More real with each passing moment than the life of Michael Chen. As night fell, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, staring at the gear. I knew I should be more panicked, should be fighting against this impossible situation. But a calm had settled over me. The life of David Johnson was seeping into every corner of my mind, filling in the gaps, becoming more solid and real. By morning, the last wisps of Michael Chen's life had faded away like a half-remembered dream. I was David Johnson. I had always been David Johnson. I packed my bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed to my presentation. The strange events of the previous day, nothing more than a curious anecdote. A momentary confusion brought on by stress and jet lag. As I hailed a cab to the airport later that day, eager to get home to Sarah, a man rushed past me on the sidewalk. For a split second, our eyes met. I saw confusion there, fear, a desperate question forming on his lips. But then he was gone, swallowed up by the crowd. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something. Recognition, unease. But it passed quickly, replaced by thoughts of home, of Sarah, of the life waiting for me. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I glanced back. The man was standing there, staring after me, a look of utter loss on his face. Our eyes met one last time through the rear window, and then he was gone. And with him, the last echo of a life I'd never lived. I turned back around, settling into the seat. Airport, please, I told the driver, already thinking about seeing Sarah, about dinner with her parents on Saturday, about the life I was returning to. My life, the only life I'd ever known. Wasn't it? The photograph slipped from my trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor like a fallen leaf. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I'd just seen. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. And yet, there it was. A picture of me, standing in my own living room, sound asleep. I'd found the photo tucked inside my mailbox this morning, nestled between bills and junk mail. At first, I thought it was just an odd angle, a trick of the light. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became. It was me, in my favorite pajamas, standing upright in the middle of my living room with my eyes closed. The timestamp in the corner read, 3:17 a.m., just 2 nights ago. I live alone. I always lock my doors and windows, and I certainly don't sleepwalk. With shaking hands, I picked up the photo again, scrutinizing every detail. The more I looked, the more unsettling it became. The angle suggested the picture was taken from near my front door. Someone had been in my house mere feet away from me while I was completely unaware. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the background of the photo, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure, a dark silhouette, standing in the hallway leading to my bedroom, watching me, watching the photographer. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a break-in. This was something far more sinister. I spent the next hour on the phone with the police, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They took my report but didn't seem overly concerned. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. They suggested I change my locks and promised to send an officer to do a drive-by later that night. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Someone had been in my house, had photographed me at my most vulnerable, and they wanted me to know about it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, lights blazing, a kitchen knife clutched in my sweaty palm. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to see a shadow move across the wall, to hear footsteps creeping down the hallway. But nothing happened. The night passed, torturously slow, and dawn finally broke. Exhausted and jittery from too much coffee, I headed to work. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the train, in the office, walking down the street, everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. When I returned home that evening, I found another envelope in my mailbox. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. Inside was another photo. This time, I was at my kitchen table, head down on my arms as if I'd fallen asleep while eating breakfast. The timestamp showed it was from that very morning. I hadn't fallen asleep at the table. I remembered my morning clearly. I'd been too wired, too scared to even sit down for breakfast. I'd paced the kitchen, gulping down coffee before rushing out the door. But the evidence was right there in my hands. Somehow, someone had been in my house again, had drugged me, positioned me, photographed me, all without leaving a trace. I called the police again. This time, they sent an officer to take my statement in person. He was young, probably fresh out of the academy, and he tried to hide his skepticism as I babbled about the photos, about feeling watched. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you sure you're not sleepwalking? Or maybe taking any medication that might cause memory loss?" I wanted to scream, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he understood the terror I was living with. Instead, I just shook my head, fighting back tears. He left me with a card for a local security company and a promise to look into it. But I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me, that he thought I was just another bored suburbanite with an overactive imagination. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, opened up a live streaming app, and started recording. If something happened, if someone came into my house, I'd have proof. Hours ticked by. The house creaked and settled. Cars occasionally drove by outside, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. Until 3:17 a.m. One moment, I was staring at the screen, fighting to keep my eyes open. The next, I was waking up, slumped over the table. Confused, I looked at the time, 5:45 a.m. With a growing sense of dread, I rewound the live stream. There I was, sitting at the table, eyes glued to the screen. And then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the feed went dark. When it came back on 2 hours later, I was in the same position, fast asleep. Someone had turned off my camera. Someone had been in my house, again, while I was right there. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up, fear and revulsion overwhelming me. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible, but it was. The evidence was there, undeniable. I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the outside world, couldn't bear the thought of leaving my house unguarded. Instead, I spent the day researching security systems, paranormal phenomena, anything that might explain what was happening to me. As evening approached, I braced myself for another envelope, another photograph. But my mailbox was empty. Somehow, that was even more terrifying. Were they done with me? Or were they planning something worse? I didn't sleep that night either. or the next. I existed in a haze of caffeine and fear, jumping at every sound, scrutinizing every shadow. I installed new locks, set up security cameras, even hired a private investigator. But nothing turned up any evidence of an intruder. Days turned into weeks. No more photos appeared, but the feeling of being watched never left. I lost my job, too erratic and exhausted to function. I alienated my friends and family, my paranoia pushing them away. My life became a waking nightmare, an endless vigil against an enemy I couldn't see or understand. And then, exactly 1 month after the first photo appeared, I found another envelope in my mailbox. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No photo this time, just a typed message. "We see you when you're sleeping. We know when you're awake. We've been inside your mind, and now we're coming to take." The paper slipped from my numb fingers. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. Inside my mind, coming to take. Take what? As if in answer, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. A heaviness in my limbs, a fog descending over my thoughts. I tried to move, to call for help, but my body wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was my own reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes were open, but blank, empty. And behind me, just visible in the mirror's edge, was a figure, dark, featureless, reaching for me with shadowy hands. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. The doctor said I'd suffered a psychotic break, that I'd been found wandering the streets, babbling about photos and watchers in the night. They showed me the camera footage from my house, footage of me sleepwalking, taking photos of myself, typing out that final message. They told me it was all in my mind, that I'd created this elaborate delusion, this mystery to solve, to escape from the mundane reality of my life. And as I sit here in this sterile room, under the watchful eyes of nurses and orderlies, I almost believe them. Almost. But sometimes, late at night when the ward is quiet, I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow where no shadow should be, and I wonder, was it all in my mind? Or did they just want me to think it was? Because if it was real, if those watchers in the night truly exist, then they're still out there, waiting, watching, and someday they'll come for me again. The thought should terrify me, but as I drift off to sleep, a strange sense of calm washes over me, because now I know the truth. Now I understand. In this world of watchers and shadows, of realities that shift and minds that fracture, there's only one thing I can be certain of. I am not alone, and neither are you. The text message glowed ominously on my phone screen. "I know what you did last summer." My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the words, a chill running down my spine. It wasn't the cliché horror movie line that bothered me. It was the fact that I couldn't remember what I did last summer. At all. I'm Ben, a 28-year-old software developer living in Seattle. My life has always been pretty ordinary. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. But everything changed the day I received that text. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe one of my coworkers was messing with me. I tried to laugh it off, but something about it nagged at me. I scrolled through my photo gallery, looking for pictures from last summer. There were plenty from spring, and then it jumped to fall. The entire summer was just gone. I racked my brain, trying to remember anything from those missing months, family barbecues, 4th of July fireworks, weekend hikes, all blank. It was as if someone had taken an eraser to that part of my memory. Unsettled, I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "Someone who knows the truth. Meet me at Volunteer Park near the water tower, 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone." I shouldn't have gone. Every instinct told me it was a bad idea. But the gnawing uncertainty, the inexplicable gap in my memory, drove me forward. As the sun began to set, I found myself walking through the park, my hands shoved deep in my pockets to hide their trembling. The water tower loomed ahead, a silent sentinel in the gathering dusk. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in its shadow, a woman, her face obscured by the hood of her jacket. "Ben," she said as I drew near. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you know about last summer?" She pulled back her hood, revealing a face that was hauntingly familiar, yet I couldn't place it. "My name is Alex, and I know everything about last summer because I was there with you." My mind reeled. I had no recollection of this woman, no memory of spending time with her. I don't understand. I don't remember you. A sad smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I know. That's part of the problem. Something happened to us. Ben. Something they don't want us to remember." "They? Who's they? What are you talking about?" Alex glanced around nervously. "Not here. It's not safe. We need to go somewhere private." Against my better judgment, I followed her. We ended up at a small, dingy motel on the outskirts of town. As we entered the room, Alex immediately drew the curtains and checked the smoke detector for hidden cameras. "Okay," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Start talking." "What's going on?" She took a deep breath. "Last summer, you and I were part of a research study, volunteer subjects for a new memory enhancement drug. It was supposed to help people with degenerative brain diseases, maybe even reverse Alzheimer's." As she spoke, flashes of memory began to surface. A sterile lab, men in white coats, the sharp sting of a needle in my arm. "The drug worked," Alex continued. "Too well. We started remembering things we shouldn't, things they didn't want anyone to know." "What things?" I asked, my mouth dry. She shook her head. "I'm not sure. Every time I try to focus on it, it slips away. But I know it was big. Government secrets, maybe. Corporate conspiracies. Whatever it was, they decided we knew too much." Another memory surfaced. Alarms blaring, running through dark corridors. The panic in Alex's eyes as she gripped my hand. "We escaped," I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. "But they caught us, didn't they?" Alex nodded grimly. "They wiped our memories, erased the entire summer, but they didn't get everything. Fragments remained, buried deep in our subconscious. I've spent the last year piecing it together, trying to find you and the others." "Others? There are more of us?" "5 total. You're the third I've found. The other 2. She trailed off, her eyes shadowed with pain. I sank onto the bed, my head spinning. This is insane. How do I know you're telling the truth? This could all be some elaborate hoax. "You have a scar," Alex said quietly. "On your left side, just below your ribs. You don't know how you got it, do you?" My hand instinctively went to the spot. The scar had appeared mysteriously last fall. I'd assumed I'd gotten it during some forgotten accident. "That's where they inserted the tracking chip," Alex explained. "We all have them. It's how they've been monitoring us, making sure we don't remember." I lifted my shirt, staring at the thin white line on my skin. If that's true, then they know we're here. They're probably on their way right now. Alex nodded grimly. "Probably, but I came prepared this time." She reached into her bag and pulled out what looked like a taser. "Electromagnetic pulse. It'll fry the chips, but it'll hurt like hell." Before I could protest, she pressed the device to my side and activated it. Pain exploded through my body, every nerve ending on fire. I bit back a scream, tasting blood. As the pain subsided, something extraordinary happened. It was as if a dam had broken in my mind. Memories came flooding back, a torrent of images and sensations. The lab, the experiments, the incredible rush as the drug took effect, opening doors in my mind I never knew existed. And then, the truth. Horrible, world-shattering truths that no one was ever meant to know. I gasped, overwhelmed by the onslaught of recovered memories. "Oh God," I whispered. "It's all true. Everything you said. And it's so much worse than we thought." Alex's face was grim. "I know. And now that we remember they'll be coming for us, we need to move. Fast." As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires came from outside. Harsh voices shouted orders. They had found us. "Out the back," Alex hissed, grabbing her bag. "I have a car stashed nearby." We slipped out just as the front door burst open. Gunshots rang out behind us as we sprinted through the dark parking lot. My lungs burned, my newly awakened memories screaming at me to run faster, to escape the fate I now remembered all too clearly. We made it to Alex's car, an old sedan hidden behind a dilapidated garage. As we peeled out onto the highway, I saw black SUVs in the rearview mirror, gaining on us quickly. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking. Alex's eyes were fixed on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We find the others, we expose the truth, and we pray to God we're not too late." As we sped into the night, my mind reeled with the weight of recovered memories. The experiments, the truths we'd uncovered, the terrible price of knowledge. I didn't know if we'd survive the night, let alone manage to expose the conspiracy we'd stumbled upon. But I knew one thing for certain. My ordinary life was over. There was no going back to blissful ignorance. Whatever happened next, whether we succeeded or failed, the world would never be the same, and neither would I. The headlights of our pursuers grew closer in the mirror. Alex swerved onto a side road, the engine roaring as she pushed the old car to its limits. "Hold on," she shouted over the wind rushing through the open windows. "This is going to get rough." As we hurtled into the unknown, a strange calm settled over me. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose. We had been given a second chance, an opportunity to right the wrongs we had uncovered. Whatever the cost, whatever dangers lay ahead, I knew we had to see this through. The truth had to come out. And so we drove on into the night, two unlikely heroes on a desperate mission, carrying the weight of impossible knowledge and the hopes of a world that didn't even know it needed saving. The adventure that had begun last summer was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The acrid smell of burning rubber filled my nostrils as I stood on the side of the desolate highway, watching helplessly as black smoke billowed from under the hood of my car. This wasn't how my road trip was supposed to go. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, my cell phone showing no bars, and the sun was already dipping below the horizon. That's when I saw the headlights approaching in the distance, and for a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Little did I know, those lights marked the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. I'm Sarah, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Portland. I decided to take a solo road trip down the Pacific Coast Highway, a little adventure to clear my head after a messy breakup. Everything had been going great until my trusty old Civic decided to give up the ghost on this lonely stretch of road. As the approaching car slowed down, I waved my arms, grateful for any help. It was an old pickup truck, rust eating away at its edges. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and a worn baseball cap, leaned out of the window. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. It just started smoking. "I don't suppose you know anything about cars?" He chuckled, stepping out of the truck. "Been fixing cars longer than you've been alive, I reckon. Let's take a look." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe my luck was turning around after all. The man, who introduced himself as Tom, popped the hood and peered inside. After a few minutes of tinkering, He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Well, the good news is it's just a blown radiator hose. Bad news is, you ain't going nowhere tonight. Nearest town's about 30 miles that way, he said, jerking his thumb down the road. My heart sank. Oh no, I don't suppose there's a motel or something closer? Tom shook his head. Afraid not. But listen, I've got a little cabin not far from here. My wife and I, we sometimes put up stranded travelers. You're welcome to stay the night, and I can give you a ride into town in the morning to get that hose replaced. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to trust a stranger, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. But as the last rays of sunlight disappeared and a chill wind picked up, I realized I didn't have much choice. That's really kind of you, I said, trying to sound grateful rather than apprehensive. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Tom said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Grab what you need for the night and hop in. As we drove off, leaving my poor car behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The truck's headlights cut through the growing darkness, illuminating a landscape that seemed to become more desolate with each passing mile. We turned off the main road onto a dirt track that wound its way into dense woods. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping against the truck like skeletal fingers. I gripped my bag tighter, my knuckles white. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small clearing. The cabin stood before us, a squat, dark shape against the night sky. No porch light welcomed us, no smoke curled from the chimney. It looked abandoned. Home sweet home, Tom announced, killing the engine. As we stepped out of the truck, the silence hit me like a physical force. No crickets chirped, no night birds called. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Tom led the way to the cabin, fishing out a key from his pocket. The door creaked open, revealing a musty interior lit only by the beam of Tom's flashlight. Power's been acting up lately, he explained, moving to light an oil lamp on a nearby table. The wife's probably already in bed. She turns in early these days. In the dim, flickering light, I could make out sparse furnishings, a threadbare couch, a rickety table, a few chairs. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. It didn't look like anyone had lived here for months, maybe years. The guest room's just down the hall, Tom said, gesturing vaguely. Bathroom's right next to it. Make yourself at home. I mumbled my thanks, clutching my overnight bag like a shield. As I made my way down the narrow hallway, the floorboards groaned under my feet. The guest room was small, dominated by a sagging twin bed with faded floral sheets. A musty smell permeated the air, and I had to fight the urge to gag. I'll leave you to get settled. Tom's voice came from behind me, making me jump. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite. He chuckled at his own joke, the sound grating in the stillness of the house. As soon as I heard his footsteps retreat, I closed the door and wedged a chair under the handle. It wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in, but it made me feel a little safer. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Everything about this situation felt wrong. Where was Tom's wife? Why did the cabin look abandoned? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that I was in terrible danger? I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope that I might have signal now. Nothing. I was truly cut off from the world. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in the dark, every sense on high alert. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound making me flinch. Hours crawled by, marked only by the slow movement of moonlight across the dusty floor. It must have been close to midnight when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the hallway. They paused outside my door. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the thin walls. The doorknob rattled. Once, twice, then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in terror. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, but any relief I felt was short-lived, because now I could hear voices, muffled at first, then growing clearer as whoever was speaking moved closer to my room. "Can't keep doing this, Tom." A woman's voice, thin and reedy. "The police will catch on eventually." "Shut up, Martha," Tom's gruff voice replied. "No one's going to miss one more pretty young thing. Besides, we need the money." My blood ran cold. This wasn't about offering shelter to a stranded traveler. This was something far more sinister. I had to get out. Now. With shaking hands, I gathered my things, shoving them haphazardly into my bag. The window was small, but I thought I could squeeze through. As I pushed it open, wincing at every creak, I heard the voices stop abruptly. "Did you hear that?" Martha's voice. I'm suddenly alert. Footsteps approached my door again, faster this time. I didn't wait to see if the chair would hold. I pushed myself through the window, tumbling onto the hard ground outside. Pain shot through my ankle as I landed, but adrenaline pushed me to my feet. I could hear shouts from inside the cabin now, the sound of running feet. I plunged into the woods, branches whipping at my face as I ran blindly through the darkness. Behind me, I heard the cabin door slam open, Tom's voice bellowing into the night. "Come back here, girl. You don't know these woods. You'll never make it out alive." His words spurred me on, even as my lungs burned and my injured ankle screamed in protest. I had no idea where I was going, no plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as possible. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark forest. Eventually, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The woods were silent again, no sign of pursuit. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of my situation sank in. I was lost in an unfamiliar forest in the middle of the night, with no phone, no idea which direction to go, and two potentially murderous strangers somewhere behind me. But I was alive, and as long as I was alive, I had a chance. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I picked a direction and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay still. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig made me flinch, certain that Tom and Martha were closing in. It was mid-morning when I finally broke through the tree line and found myself on a road. I could have wept with relief. I followed it, limping on my swollen ankle, until I came across a gas station. The attendant looked alarmed when I stumbled in, dirty and disheveled. I must have looked half mad as I babbled out my story, but he believed me enough to call the police. In the end, they found Tom and Martha's cabin. The horrors they discovered there. Well, let's just say I wasn't the first traveler they'd lured in. I was just the first to escape. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket around my shoulders, I watched the police cars speed off into the distance, sirens blaring. The nightmare was over, but I knew the memories of that night would stay with me forever. I'd set out on this trip looking for adventure, for a way to clear my head after a bad breakup. Instead, I'd found terror beyond anything I could have imagined, but I'd also found a strength in myself I never knew existed. As the ambulance doors closed and we pulled away, I made a silent vow. I would never again take my safety for granted, and the next time I went on a road trip, I'd make damn sure my car was in perfect working order first. The security camera flickered to life, its grainy image filling the monitor in front of me. At first, all I saw was the empty hallway, bathed in the eerie glow of emergency lighting. Then, a shadow moved across the screen, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. My heart rate spiked, and I leaned closer, squinting at the monitor. That's when I saw it, a figure, barely visible, standing at the end of the corridor. It wasn't moving, just watching. And somehow, impossibly, I knew it was looking right at me. My name is Mike, and I've been working as a night security guard at Oak Ridge office complex for the past 6 months. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my novel. At least, That's what I thought until tonight. The night had started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., relieved the day shift guard, and settled in for my usual routine of hourly rounds and mindless TV watching. The complex was always eerily quiet at night, with only the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the old building to keep me company. It was during my 2 a.m. round that I first noticed something was off. As I walked down the main corridor on the 3rd floor, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was colder than usual, the kind of bone-deep cold that seeps into your very core. I shrugged it off, assuming the AC was just working overtime, but then I heard it, a soft whisper, so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. I paused, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Mike, help us." I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But the hallway was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the oppressive silence of the empty building. With shaking hands, I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. Frustrated, I headed back to the security office, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Back in the office, I poured myself a cup of coffee, hoping the caffeine would chase away the lingering unease. That's when I noticed the security cameras. Usually, the monitors showed empty hallways, occasionally flickering as they cycled through different areas of the building. But now, every single screen was filled with static, except for one. The 3rd floor hallway camera was crystal clear, and that's where I saw the figure, standing motionless at the far end. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. This couldn't be real. When I looked again, the figure was gone. But the unease remained, settling in my stomach like a lead weight. For the next hour, I watched the monitors intently, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing, just empty hallways and offices. At 3:30 a.m., I decided to do another round. I told myself it was just to be thorough, but deep down, I knew I was hoping to find some rational explanation for what I'd seen. The moment I stepped out of the office, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like walking through invisible cobwebs, and it was cold, so cold I could see my breath misting in front of me. I made my way slowly down the hallway, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the silence. As I turned the corner to the 3rd floor corridor, I froze. There, at the far end, was the figure I'd seen on the camera. It was tall, unnaturally so, its form blurred and indistinct, like smoke given human shape. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The figure began to move towards me, not walking, but gliding across the floor. As it got closer, I could make out more details, or rather, the lack of them. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling void. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, unable to do anything but watch as the figure drew nearer. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped, and then, impossibly, it spoke. "Mike," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers, "we need your help." I found my voice at last. "Who? What are you?" The figure seemed to ripple, its edges blurring even more. "We are those who cannot leave, trapped, forgotten. You must help us." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, what I was hearing. "I don't understand. How can I help?" The figure raised an arm, pointing down the hallway. "The truth lies in the archives. Find it. Set us free." And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The oppressive cold lifted, and I could move again. I stumbled back to the security office, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. For the rest of my shift, I sat in the office, jumping at every sound, my eyes glued to the monitors, but nothing else happened. When the morning shift arrived, I didn't know what to say. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? I went home, exhausted but unable to sleep. The figure's words echoed in my mind. The truth lies in the archives. I spent the day researching the history of Oak Ridge Office Complex. It had been built in the 1960s, originally as a research facility for a pharmaceutical company. But as I dug deeper, I found whispers of darker things, unethical experiments, unexplained disappearances, hushed-up accidents. That night, I returned to work with a sense of purpose. I knew I had to find those archives, had to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. During my rounds, I searched every floor, looking for any sign of an archive room. It was on the 5th floor, in a dusty, forgotten corner, that I found it. A door marked Archives, its lock rusted with age. With shaking hands, I picked the lock, a skill I'd learned in my misspent youth and never thought I'd use again. The door creaked open, revealing a room packed with file cabinets and shelves laden with old boxes. For hours, I pored over documents, piecing together a horrifying truth. The pharmaceutical company hadn't just been developing new drugs, they'd been experimenting on people, pushing the boundaries of science and ethics. And when things went wrong, when people died, they covered it up. But that wasn't the worst of it. I found records of a project aimed at extending human consciousness beyond death. They had succeeded in the most terrible way possible. They had created a way to trap souls, to bind them to this plane of existence. And then, when the truth threatened to come out, they had shut everything down, sealed off the lower levels of the building, and left those poor souls trapped, forgotten by the world. As I read the final document, detailing the ritual that had bound the souls, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see not one error, but dozens of figures, all like the one I'd seen before. They filled the room, their whispers rising in a desperate chorus. "Free us," they pleaded. "Break the binding. Let us go." I knew what I had to do. The document in my hands held the key, a reversal of the original ritual that could set these souls free. With trembling voice, I began to read the words aloud. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the figures began to glow, their forms becoming more distinct. I could see faces now, men, women, young, old, all wearing expressions of desperate hope. As I spoke the final word, a blinding light filled the room. The figures began to fade, their whispers turning to sighs of relief. And then, they were gone. The silence that followed was profound. I stood there, surrounded by the dusty remnants of a long-buried secret, trying to process what had just happened. When my shift ended, I handed in my resignation. I couldn't stay in that building, couldn't pretend that my world hadn't been irrevocably changed. As I walked out of Oak Ridge Office Complex for the last time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth had been uncovered, the trapped souls set free. But I knew I would carry the memory of that night with me forever. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear whispers on the wind. Not pleading now, but grateful, and I know that somewhere, beyond the veil of our world, those souls are at peace at last. The floorboards creaked behind me, and I froze, my hand halfway to the light switch. I was alone in my best friend's house, or at least I was supposed to be. Slowly, I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, silhouetted in the bedroom doorway, stood a figure I didn't recognize. Before I could scream, it vanished, leaving me to question my sanity and the true nature of my friend's haunted home. I'm Alex, a 25-year-old freelance writer with a penchant for the supernatural, at least in fiction. In reality, I've always been a skeptic. So when my best friend, Jamie, asked me to house sit for a week while she was on vacation, I didn't think twice about her half-joking warning about the house being haunted. "Just don't freak out if you hear any weird noises," she'd said with a laugh as she handed me the keys. This old place has a mind of its own sometimes. I'd rolled my eyes and promised to keep her non-existent ghost company. Little did I know how those words would come back to haunt me. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time working on my laptop, enjoying the peace and quiet of Jamie's cozy suburban home. It was a far cry from my cramped city apartment, and I found myself envying her spacious rooms and well-tended garden. It was on the fourth night that things started to get strange. I was up late, fighting writer's block, when I heard it, a soft thud from upstairs like someone had dropped a book. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Jamie didn't have any pets, and I was certain I'd locked all the doors and windows. It's just the house settling, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But as I turned back to my work, another sound caught my attention. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. My heart began to race. I stood up, grabbing my phone and the heaviest book I could find as an impromptu weapon. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs, each step seeming to echo in the silence of the house. The upper hallway was dark, shadows stretching ominously from the partially open doors. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response, just the oppressive silence of an empty house, or so I hoped. I checked each room, flicking on lights and peering into corners. Nothing seemed out of place, no sign of an intruder. By the time I'd finished my search, I'd almost convinced myself it had all been in my imagination. Almost. As I turned to head back downstairs, movement caught my eye. I spun around, and that's when I saw it, the figure in the doorway. It was there for just a second, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness, vaguely human-shaped but wrong somehow, and then it was gone, leaving me with a racing heart and a mind full of questions. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had all been a product of too much caffeine and too little sleep, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I entered a room, I felt like I'd just missed seeing something, or someone, in my peripheral vision. As night fell, my nerves were frayed. I decided to call Jamie, just to hear a friendly voice. But as I reached for my phone, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. "Great," I muttered, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. But it was dead too, despite having been fully charged just hours ago. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Alex!" I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Another whisper, closer this time. "Help us." I backed away, bumping into the wall. My hand scrambled for the light switch, flicking it uselessly. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice rising. "Whoever you are, show yourself." Suddenly, the room grew cold, so cold I could see my breath misting in front of me. And then, impossibly, a figure began to materialize in front of me. It was hazy at first, like smoke given form, but slowly it solidified into the shape of a young woman. She was pale, her edges blurred, and I could see the wall behind her through her translucent form. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen in place, my eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The ghost, because what else could it be, looked at me with sad, hollow eyes. "Please," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "You have to help us." "Us," I managed to croak out. As if in response, more figures began to appear. Men, women, children, all with the same translucent appearance, all wearing clothes from different eras. They filled the room, their whispers rising in a desperate chorus. "Help us! Free us! Find the truth!" I closed my eyes, willing it all to be a dream. But when I opened them, the ghosts were still there, watching me with pleading eyes. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The first ghost, the young woman, stepped forward. "We are trapped," she said. "Bound to this house by a terrible curse. You must find the source, break the binding, set us free." "But how? I don't know anything about curses or ghosts or the answers lie within these walls." Another ghost, an elderly man, interrupted. "In the spaces between, in the secrets long buried, you must look beyond what you can see." Before I could ask more, the ghosts began to fade, their forms dissolving like mist in sunlight. The last to disappear was the young woman, her sad eyes lingering even after the rest of her had vanished. As suddenly as it had gone, the power came back on, flooding the room with light. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what I'd just experienced. Part of me wanted to run, to flee this house and never look back. But a larger part, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, knew I couldn't leave. Not now. Over the next 2 days, I threw myself into uncovering the house's secrets. I pored over old documents Jamie had stored in the attic, researched the property's history online, and even carefully examined every inch of the house, looking for hidden compartments or secret rooms. Slowly, a grim picture began to emerge. The house, it turned out, had once belonged to a man named Ezra Blackwood, a wealthy eccentric with an unhealthy obsession with the occult. In the late 1800s, he had performed a ritual meant to grant him immortality. But something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of extending his own life, Blackwood had inadvertently bound the souls of everyone who died on the property to the house. For over a century, these spirits had been trapped, unable to move on, forced to relive their final moments over and over. The key to breaking the curse, according to Blackwood's journals, lay in reversing the original ritual. But to do that, I needed to find the artifact he had used, a small, ornate box that had been hidden somewhere in the house. As the sun set on my last day of house-sitting, I finally found it. Behind a loose brick in the fireplace, I discovered a small cavity containing a dust-covered box. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of parchment, covered in spidery handwriting. The reversal ritual. As I began to read the words aloud, the temperature in the room plummeted. The ghosts appeared again, more solid this time, their faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. The air grew thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. As I spoke the final word, a blinding light filled the room. I heard the ghosts cry out, not in pain but in relief. When the light faded, they were gone. I stood there in the silent house, the empty box in my hands, wondering if it had all been real. Had I truly just freed a century's worth of trapped souls? Or had I imagined the whole thing? Just then, I heard the front door open. "Alex?" Jamie's voice called out. "I'm back early. How was everything?" I looked down at the box in my hands, then back at the empty room. How could I possibly explain what had happened? In the end, I decided, some secrets were better left untold. "Everything was fine," I called back, hiding the box behind a cushion. Just a quiet week in a perfectly normal house. As I went to greet Jamie, I couldn't help but smile. The house felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. And though I knew I'd spend the rest of my life questioning what had really happened during that week, one thing was certain. I'd never look at old houses the same way again. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the silence of my apartment, startling me awake. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for it on my nightstand, squinting at the bright screen. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the caller ID. It was my own number. With a trembling hand, I answered the call, and what I heard on the other end chilled me to my core. It was my voice, but not quite, distorted, distant, and filled with a terror that made my blood run cold. "I'm Emily," a 28-year-old software developer living in Seattle. I've always prided myself on my logical mind, my ability to find rational explanations for seemingly inexplicable events. But what happened that night, and in the days that followed, defied all logic and reason. It started with that phone call. After the initial shock wore off, I managed to croak out a hesitant, "Hello?" The voice on the other end, my voice, spoke in a rush, as if every word was a struggle. "Emily, listen to me. You're in danger. They're coming. Don't trust." The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, my phone clutched to my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. It had to be a prank, right? Some elaborate hoax using voice modulation software. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear in that voice, my voice, had been too real. Sleep was impossible after that. I paced my apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow. When dawn finally broke, I felt a small measure of relief. Surely, in the light of day, I could find a rational explanation for what had happened. But as I went about my morning routine, strange things kept occurring. My coffee maker turned on by itself, brewing a pot even though I hadn't set it. The TV flicked on, showing nothing but static, and when I checked my phone, I found dozens of missed calls, all from my own number. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the cryptic warning from the night before. They're coming. Who were they, and what was I not supposed to trust? As I was leaving the office that evening, my phone rang again. My number. This time, I hesitated before answering. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Emily, please," my own voice begged. "You have to listen. They found a way through. The calls, they're..." Once again, the line went dead. That night, I barely slept. Every time I dozed off, my phone would ring, jolting me awake. But when I answered, there was nothing but static and strange, distorted noises that made my skin crawl. The next day, things escalated. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadowy figures that vanished when I turned to look. At first, I chalked it up to lack of sleep and stress, but then I caught a clear glimpse of one in the reflection of my computer screen at work. It was me, but not me. This version of myself looked haggard, terrified, with eyes that seemed to hold secrets no one should know. I left work early, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As I hurried home, my phone constantly buzzed with incoming calls. I ignored them all. It was when I reached my apartment building that things took a turn for the truly bizarre. As I approached the entrance, I saw myself, another version of me, standing just inside the lobby. This Emily looked exactly like me, down to the clothes I was wearing, but her eyes were wide with panic, and she was mouthing something I couldn't make out. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. The other Emily pressed her hand against the glass door, her face a mask of desperation, and then, in an instant, she vanished. Shaken, I made my way up to my apartment. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard it, my own voice, coming from inside. I pressed my ear to the door. Have to break the loop, find the source, before it's too late. Heart pounding, I burst into my apartment. It was empty, but my laptop was open on the coffee table, a video call in progress. On the screen was another version of myself, looking even more haggard than the one I'd seen in the lobby. "Emily," the me on the screen said, and relief evident in her voice. "Finally, we don't have much time." "What's going on?" I demanded. "Who are you? How is this possible?" "I'm you," she said. "Or rather, I'm a version of you from another timeline. Listen carefully. Reality is fracturing. The boundaries between parallel universes are breaking down. That's why you're getting the calls, seeing other versions of yourself." I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. But how? Why? An experiment? My other self explained. In our timeline, my timeline, a group of scientists were trying to achieve faster-than-light communication, but they tore a hole in the fabric of reality instead. Now, alternate versions of ourselves from countless timelines are bleeding through. and something else is coming through with them. Something dark, something hungry. A chill ran down my spine. The they you warned me about in the first call? She nodded grimly. We don't know what they are exactly, but they feed on the energy released when timelines collapse, and they're causing more collapses to feed their hunger. If we don't stop it, all of reality could unravel. How do we stop it? I asked, surprising myself with how quickly I was accepting this insane situation. The tear originated in our timeline, but the effects are cascading through all realities. We need to close it from multiple points. That's why I've been trying to contact as many versions of ourselves as possible. We need to work together, across timelines, to seal the breach. Just then, the image on my laptop began to flicker. We're losing the connection, my other self said urgently. Find the others. Pool our knowledge. The key is... The screen went black. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process everything I'd just learned. Part of me still wanted to believe it was all an elaborate hoax or a stress-induced hallucination, but deep down, I knew it was real. The fear I'd seen in my own eyes, in the eyes of my other selves, was too genuine to be faked. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research, looking for any scientific theories that could explain what was happening. I also tried to make contact with other versions of myself, using my laptop, my phone, even an old radio I dug out of my closet. Slowly, I began to piece together the puzzle. Different Emilys from different timelines each had parts of the solution. One knew the frequency needed to close the breach. Another had the equations to stabilize the walls between realities. A third had discovered a way to repel the dark entities that were feeding on the collapse. But coordinating our efforts proved challenging. The connections between timelines were unstable, communications often cutting off at crucial moments. And all the while, I could feel reality becoming more fragile. The glimpses of other selves became more frequent, sometimes solid enough that I could almost touch them before they flickered out of existence. It all came to a head exactly 1 week after that first phone call. I woke in the middle of the night to find my apartment filled with ghostly versions of myself. Some were barely more than whispers, while others looked as solid as I was. All wore expressions of grim determination. It's time, one of them said, the one I recognized from the video call. The collapse is accelerating. We have to act now. What followed was the strangest experience of my life. Guided by the knowledge we'd pieced together, we formed a circle in my living room. Each of us represented a different point in the multiverse, a different strand of reality. As we began the process to seal the breach, I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if I could sense every version of myself across countless timelines, all focused on this single, crucial task. The air around us began to shimmer and twist. I caught glimpses of other realities, worlds where history had taken different turns, where I had made different choices. And in the spaces between, I saw them, the dark entities, writhing and reaching, trying to stop us. We pushed back, our combined will creating a barrier they couldn't penetrate. The energy built to a crescendo, and for a moment, I felt like I could see the very fabric of reality, the intricate web of timelines and possibilities. There was a flash of blinding light, a sensation of being stretched and compressed simultaneously, and then silence. I found myself alone in my apartment, sprawled on the floor. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream. But then I saw it, a small, silver device on my coffee table that hadn't been there before. A note beside it read, "In case of emergencies, let's hope we never need to use it. E.T." As I picked up the device, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had glimpsed the true nature of reality, had worked with other versions of myself to save not just our world, but all possible worlds. The phone calls from myself stopped after that night. The glimpses of other realities faded. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but I knew the truth. And I knew that somewhere out there, across the vast expanse of the multiverse, other versions of me were going about their lives, each carrying the secret knowledge of what we had accomplished together. As I got ready for work that morning, I couldn't help but smile at my reflection in the mirror. "Good job, us," I whispered, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw my reflection wink back at me. The first time I noticed something was missing from my apartment, I brushed it off as forgetfulness. The second time, I chalked it up to stress. But by the third time, when I came home to find my favorite mug gone without a trace, I knew something was terribly wrong. Someone was entering my home while I was away, but instead of taking valuables, they were slowly erasing pieces of my life, one small item at a time. My name is Olivia, and until a month ago, I was just another 29-year-old trying to make it in the big city. I work as a graphic designer for a small advertising firm, spend too much money on fancy coffee, and binge-watch true crime documentaries on the weekends. Normal stuff, you know? It all started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had a big presentation at work, and I was running late. I rushed around my apartment, gathering my things, when I realized I couldn't find my lucky pen. It was a gift from my grandfather, nothing fancy, just a sleek black ballpoint with my name engraved on it. I always kept it on my desk, but that morning, it was nowhere to be found. I turned my apartment upside down looking for it, but eventually had to give up and leave for work. I figured it would turn up eventually. It didn't. A week later, I noticed my favorite throw pillow was missing from the couch. It was a quirky thing, embroidered with a quote from my favorite book. I remembered using it just the night before, but now it was gone. I searched everywhere, even ridiculous places like the fridge and the oven, but it had vanished into thin air. That's when the unease started to set in. I'm not a particularly forgetful person, and I live alone. There was no logical explanation for these disappearances, but it was the incident with the mug that really sent me over the edge. It was a Monday evening, and I'd had a rough day at work. All I wanted was to curl up with a cup of tea in my favorite mug, a handmade ceramic piece I'd bought at a local art fair. But when I opened the cupboard, it wasn't there. I stood there, staring at the empty space where it should have been, and felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just misplacement or forgetfulness. Something was very, very wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up, lights on, jumping at every little sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my apartment, touching my things, invading my space. But why? And how were they getting in? The next day, I called my landlord and had the locks changed. I even installed a small security camera in my living room, hiding it among the books on my shelf. I felt a little silly, like I was overreacting, but I needed to know what was happening. For a few days, nothing happened. No more disappearances, no strange noises. I started to relax, thinking maybe it had all been in my head. Then, exactly a week after the mug incident, I checked the security footage and felt my blood run cold. There, in grainy black and white, was a figure moving through my living room. They moved with purpose, clearly familiar with the layout of my apartment. I watched, horrified, as they picked up a framed photo from my mantel, a picture of me and my best friend at her wedding, and simply walked out of frame with it. I rewound the footage, watching it again and again. The figure was careful to keep their face turned away from the camera, but something about their movement seemed familiar. It was like watching a distorted version of myself move through the apartment. I called the police, showing them the footage. They took a report, but didn't seem overly concerned. No signs of forced entry, nothing valuable stolen. They suggested it might be someone with access to the building, a maintenance worker or another tenant. They promised to look into it, but I could tell they didn't consider it a high priority. Frustrated and scared, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up more cameras, covering every angle of my apartment. I started keeping a detailed inventory of everything I owned, checking it obsessively every day. I even considered setting up booby traps, but decided that might be a step too far. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The constant vigilance was exhausting, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so desperate for excitement in my life that I'd invented this bizarre mystery? Then, last night, it happened again. I was at a work event, running late as usual. When I got home, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but as I moved through my apartment, it hit me. The painting above my bed, a beautiful landscape my mother had painted, was gone. With shaking hands, I pulled up the security footage. There it was again, that eerily familiar figure. This time, they lingered in front of the painting, staring at it for a long moment before carefully taking it off the wall and leaving. But this time, I caught something new. As the figure turned to leave, the light caught their face for just a second. My heart stopped. The face looking back at me was my own. I stumbled back from my laptop, my mind reeling. It wasn't possible. How could I be in my apartment when I knew I was at the work event? I had dozens of colleagues who could vouch for my whereabouts. I spent the rest of the night poring over the footage, analyzing every frame. The more I looked, the more certain I became. The person in my apartment was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. They moved like me, had my mannerisms, even wore clothes from my wardrobe. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light through my windows, a thought occurred to me. What if this wasn't someone breaking into my apartment? What if it was me from another time? The idea was insane, of course. Time travel isn't real. But as I sat there, surrounded by the ever-dwindling remnants of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond my understanding was happening. I started researching, diving into forums about parallel universes and time slips. Most of it seemed like crackpot theories, but some of it rang true in a way I couldn't explain. There were stories of people encountering other versions of themselves, of objects disappearing and reappearing in impossible ways. And then I found it. A theory about universe overlap. The idea that sometimes, rarely, two nearly identical universes could briefly occupy the same space. In those moments, the theory went, things could slip between realities. It was crazy, completely, utterly insane. But it was the only explanation that fit all the facts. The familiar movements, the lack of forced entry, the selective nature of the disappearances. It wasn't a burglar taking my things. It was another version of me, one whose reality was slightly different from my own. As I write this, I'm sitting in my increasingly empty apartment, waiting. I've set up the cameras again, but this time, I'm not trying to catch an intruder. I'm trying to make contact. If this other me is real, if she's slipping between our realities and taking pieces of my life, there has to be a reason. Are the missing items present in her world? Is she trying to correct some cosmic imbalance? Or is something darker at play? I don't know what will happen if I come face to face with this other version of myself. But I know I can't go on living like this, watching my life disappear piece by piece. So I wait, and I watch, and I wonder, in some other reality, is another Olivia sitting in an apartment full of familiar yet strange objects, writing her own story about the mysterious appearances in her home? As the sun sets, casting long shadows across my floor, I feel a strange sense of calm. Whatever happens next, at least I'll have answers. And who knows? Maybe this is just the beginning of an adventure beyond anything I could have imagined. After all, if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that reality is far stranger and more malleable than we ever suspected. And somewhere out there, in the vast tapestry of existence, another me is waiting. It's time we had a talk. The electricity flickered, plunging the house into momentary darkness. In that split second of blackness, I saw her, a small figure standing at the end of the hallway, her pale face illuminated by a light that seemed to come from nowhere. My heart leapt into my throat as I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But when the lights hummed back to life, she was gone. That's when I realized the nightmare wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It had followed me into the waking world. My name is Megan, and I'm a 32-year-old elementary school teacher, or at least I was until 3 weeks ago when I decided to take a leave of absence. You see, I haven't had a full night's sleep in months, not since the dream started. It always begins the same way. I'm in a long, dark hallway. At the far end, barely visible in the gloom, is a little girl. She's wearing a white dress, her long dark hair obscuring her face. As I walk towards her, the hallway seems to stretch, keeping her always just out of reach. And then, just as I get close enough to almost make out her features, she looks up. That's when I wake up, drenched in sweat. A scream caught in my throat. At first, I brushed it off as stress. Teaching first graders is rewarding, but it's also exhausting. Nightmares aren't uncommon when you're overworked and underrested. But as the weeks went by, the dream became more frequent, more vivid. I started dreading going to bed, knowing what waited for me in the darkness of sleep. I tried everything: sleep aids, meditation, even a dream catcher my well-meaning colleagues swore would help. Nothing worked. The little girl in the white dress haunted my nights with unwavering consistency. It was affecting my work. I'd find myself zoning out in the middle of lessons, startling at sudden movements, seeing shadows where there were none. My principal suggested I take some time off, get some rest. If only she knew how impossible that was. That's how I ended up here, in my childhood home. My parents are on a cruise, celebrating their 40th anniversary. They were more than happy to let me house sit, thinking the change of scenery would do me good. Little did any of us know, we were walking right into the heart of the mystery. The first few nights were uneventful. The familiar creaks and groans of the old house were almost comforting. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. I began to relax, to think that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind me. Then came the night of the flickering lights. I was in the kitchen making a late-night snack when it happened. The momentary darkness, the ghostly apparition, and then nothing. I stood there, sandwich forgotten, staring down the now empty hallway. Had I imagined it? Was my sleep-deprived brain finally cracking under the strain? I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I began to investigate. I told myself I was being silly, that there had to be a logical explanation. But as I dug through old photo albums and boxes of memorabilia, a chill ran down my spine. There, in a faded Polaroid from decades ago, was a little girl in a white dress. She was standing in front of this very house, her face turned away from the camera. With trembling hands, I turned the photo over. On the back, in my grandmother's spidery handwriting, was a single name, Elizabeth, 1972. I had never heard of an Elizabeth in our family. My mom was an only child, and neither of my grandparents had siblings. Who was this girl, and why did she look so much like the figure from my dreams? That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, jumping at every creak and shadow. As the clock struck midnight, I found myself standing at the end of the hallway where I'd seen the apparition. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. "Elizabeth?" I called out, feeling both foolish and terrified. "Are you here?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard a giggle. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The lights began to flicker again, more violently this time. In the strobe-like effect, I saw her. She was standing right in front of me, her big dark eyes looking up into mine. And then, impossibly, she spoke. "You can see me," she said, her voice a mix of wonder and sadness. "No one's been able to see me for so long." I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from what surely must be another nightmare, but I stood my ground. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Why are you here?" The girl, Elizabeth, looked down, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "I live here," she said simply, or, "I did, a long time ago." As she spoke, the air around us seemed to shimmer. The hallway transformed, the modern decor melting away to reveal how it must have looked decades ago. I saw flashes of a life long past, Elizabeth playing with dolls, running down the stairs, laughing with a woman who must have been her mother. "What happened to you?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "There was a fire," she whispered. "I got scared. I hid. They couldn't find me in time." My heart broke for this little girl, trapped for so long in a moment of fear and confusion. "But why me?" I asked. "Why have you been appearing in my dreams?" She looked up at me, a small smile on her face. "You're like me," she said. "You can see things others can't. I've been trying to reach you, to ask for your help." "My help? What can I do?" Elizabeth took my hand, her touch surprisingly warm for a ghost. "I'm stuck here," she explained. "I can't move on. But you can help me find peace." Over the next few days, guided by Elizabeth's spectral presence, I delved into the history of the house and the tragic events of 1972. I discovered that the fire had indeed happened, claiming the lives of a young couple and their daughter. The bodies of the parents were found, but the child was never recovered. Armed with this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. With Elizabeth by my side, invisible to all but me, I went to the local authorities. I told them about the dreams, the apparition, the hidden history of the house. They were skeptical at first, but something in my conviction must have swayed them. A team was sent to the house, armed with ground-penetrating radar and other high-tech equipment. And there, in a long-forgotten root cellar, they found her, the earthly remains of a small girl, clutching a teddy bear, hidden away from the fire that had claimed her family. As they carefully excavated the site, I felt a tug on my hand. Elizabeth stood beside me, but she looked different now. The sadness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a peaceful light. "Thank you," she said, her form already starting to fade. "I can go home now." I watched, tears streaming down my face, as Elizabeth's spirit dissolved into motes of light, drifting up into the clear blue sky. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep, easy breath. That night, I slept without dreaming. No more endless hallways, no more spectral little girls, just peaceful, restorative sleep. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to make sense of what had happened. Part of me wanted to rationalize it all away. Stress, an overactive imagination, a coincidence of history and happenstance. But I knew the truth. I had been given a gift, the ability to bridge the gap between this world and the next, to bring peace to a troubled soul. As I prepared to return to my life, to my students and my career, I couldn't help but wonder, was Elizabeth an isolated incident, or were there others out there, lost souls in need of help? Only time would tell. For now, I was content in the knowledge that I had made a difference, that I had helped a little girl find her way home. And if my dreams ever again filled with long, dark hallways and ghostly figures, well, I would be ready. After all, sometimes the things that go bump in the night aren't looking to scare us. Sometimes they're just looking for a helping hand to guide them into the light. The first red flag should have been the way his eyes never quite met mine when he smiled. But I was too caught up in the whirlwind romance, the feeling of finally being swept off my feet, to notice. It wasn't until I woke up at 3 a.m. and saw him standing outside my bedroom window, staring up at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold, that I realized I had invited a monster into my life. My name is Sophie, and this is the story of how I fell in love with a man who turned out to be my worst nightmare. It all started innocently enough. I met Jack at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was charming, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. After years of dead-end relationships and disappointing first dates, Jack felt like a breath of fresh air. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Fancy dinners, surprise weekend getaways, flowers delivered to my office for no reason at all. Jack was attentive, caring, and seemed to anticipate my every need. I felt like I was living in a romantic comedy, complete with a too-good-to-be-true leading man. Looking back, I can see the warning signs that I chose to ignore. The way he'd get oddly quiet when I talked about my friends or family, his insistence on knowing where I was at all times, under the guise of wanting to surprise me, the subtle way he'd put down my accomplishments, always with a laugh and a kiss, so I'd think he was joking. But in the moment, I was too blinded by what I thought was love to see the red flags for what they were. It was about 3 months into our relationship when things started to take a turn. I woke up one night to find a text from Jack. "You look beautiful when you sleep." I smiled at first, thinking he must have sent it earlier and I'd missed it. Then I realized the timestamp was from just 5 minutes ago. A chill ran down my spine as I got up and peeked out my window. There, and parked across the street, was Jack's car. I could just make out his silhouette in the driver's seat, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. When I confronted him about it the next day, he laughed it off. "I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd drive by and make sure you were safe," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I worry about you, that's all." I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly for this to be a grand romantic gesture rather than what my gut was telling me it really was. So I pushed my unease aside and let myself melt into his embrace. But that night was just the beginning. I started noticing Jack's car more and more often, parked near my apartment at odd hours. He'd show up unannounced at my workplace, always with an excuse about being in the neighborhood. My friends started commenting on how they'd seen him around, even when I wasn't there. When I tried to talk to him about it, to set some boundaries, his charming smile would fade, replaced by a cold, hard look that made me shrink back. "Don't you trust me?" he'd ask, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything I've done for you." I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly afraid of setting him off. I started to withdraw from my friends and family, making excuses for why I couldn't meet up or visit. It was easier than trying to explain the growing knot of fear in my stomach every time Jack's name came up. The night everything came to a head, I had finally worked up the courage to end things. I'd asked Jack to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking a public place would be safer, but as I was getting ready to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "I'm outside. Come down." My hands shook as I peeked out the window. Sure enough, there was Jack, leaning against his car, staring up at my apartment with that same intense gaze I'd come to dread. I knew I couldn't go down there. I couldn't face him alone. Not when he had that look in his eyes. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, whispering my situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay put, that officers were on their way. For the next 15 minutes, which felt like an eternity, I watched Jack from my window. He never moved, never took his eyes off my building. When I heard a knock at my door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Police, open up," a voice called out. I rushed to let them in, relief flooding through me. As the officers took my statement, we heard a commotion from outside. Looking out the window, I saw Jack being confronted by another police officer. For a moment, he was the picture of confusion and concern, the charming man I'd fallen for. But then he saw me in the window, and his face transformed into a mask of rage. "You bitch," he screamed, lunging towards the building. The officer tackled him to the ground, and I watched in horror as Jack was handcuffed and put into a police car. The aftermath was a blur of restraining orders, court dates, and therapy sessions. It turned out Jack had a history of stalking and domestic violence, all carefully hidden behind his charismatic facade. I wasn't his first victim, but I was determined to be his last. In the months that followed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, and started reconnecting with the friends and family I'd pushed away. But the fear lingered. Every time I saw a car that looked like Jack's, my heart would race. Every unexpected noise in the night would send me into a panic. It was during one of these sleepless nights, almost a year after everything had happened, that I had an epiphany. I couldn't keep living like this, jumping at shadows and letting fear control my life. Jack had taken so much from me already. I couldn't let him take my future too. The next day, I signed up for self-defense classes. I joined a support group for survivors of stalking and domestic abuse. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, sharing my story and helping others who were going through similar situations. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. The Sophie who had been buried under layers of fear and self-doubt began to emerge. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize the red flags I had once ignored. Today, I still have moments of fear. There are still nights when I double-check every lock and window, but I'm no longer paralyzed by it. I've reclaimed my life, my independence, and my ability to trust. As I sit here, writing this, I think about all the other women out there who might be where I was a year ago. Women who are caught in the web of a charming predator, unable to see the danger until it's almost too late. And I want them to know that there's hope, that they're stronger than they know, that they can survive this and come out the other side, not just as victims, but as warriors. Jack took a lot from me during our time together. He took my trust, my sense of safety, and for a while, my joy. But he also gave me something, though I'm sure he never intended to. He gave me a purpose, a drive to help others, to share my story, and to fight against the kind of abuse that thrives in silence and shame. I'm not grateful for what happened to me. I'll never be glad that Jack came into my life, but I am proud of who I've become because of it. The Sophie who fell for Jack's lies and ignored the red flags is gone. In her place is a woman who is stronger, wiser, and fiercely determined to never let anyone dim her light again. To anyone out there who sees themselves in my story, who recognizes the red flags I once ignored, I want you to know this. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you have the strength within you to break free. It won't be easy, but I promise you, it will be worth it. Because on the other side of fear, there's freedom, and you deserve to be free.